Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation. Vince Morrison had always been a man of few words and calculated moves. At 52, his graying temples and weathered hands told the story of 3 decades in construction management, building everything from shopping centers to luxury resorts. What people didn't know was that Vince's real expertise lay not just in creating structures, but in understanding how to make them, and lives, crumble with surgical precision. He sat in his home office, reviewing the final blueprints for the Grandview shopping complex, his last project before retirement. The irony wasn't lost on him that he'd spent his career building things that would outlast him, while his own marriage had been rotting from the inside for years. Linda Morrison breezed through the house like she owned it, which, technically, she did, thanks to their joint ownership. At 45, she maintained her figure and her blonde highlights with religious devotion. Her heels clicked against the hardwood floors as she prepared for another book club meeting that Vince knew damn well had nothing to do with literature. "I'll be late tonight," she called out, not bothering to look in his direction. "The girls want to try that new wine bar downtown." Vince nodded without looking up from his papers. He'd learned years ago that acknowledging her lies wasn't worth the energy. Their son Tyler, now 23 and fresh out of college with a business degree he'd never used, was sprawled on the living room couch, scrolling through his phone with the intensity of someone performing brain surgery. "Dad, can I borrow $200? I'm meeting some friends tonight," Tyler said, his eyes never leaving his screen. "There's cash in the kitchen drawer," Vince replied. It was always the same routine. Tyler would take the money, disappear for the weekend, and return with stories about opportunities and connections that never materialized into anything resembling responsibility. The Morrison household had become a well-oiled machine of mutual indifference, each member playing their role with practiced precision. Vince provided the money, Linda provided the pretense of a marriage, and Tyler provided disappointment with admirable consistency. But Vince had been playing a different game entirely for the past 18 months. Ever since he discovered Linda's affair with Robert "Bobby" Hayes, the real estate mogul who'd been courting Vince's construction company for a potential merger. Bobby was everything Linda apparently wanted in a man: flashy, loud, and rich enough to buy her attention in ways that Vince's steady, quiet success never could. The discovery had been accidental. A forgotten lunch at Bobby's office, a secretary who mistook Vince for a delivery person, and an unlocked office door that revealed Linda bent over Bobby's desk in a position that had nothing to do with reviewing property deeds. Instead of the rage that most men would feel, Vince had felt something colder and more dangerous: clarity. He'd walked away that day without saying a word, without confronting them, without even letting the shock register on his face. Instead, he'd gone home and begun planning. Because Vincent Morrison understood something that Bobby Hayes and his cheating wife didn't. The most devastating collapses always started with a single, carefully placed crack in the foundation. Over the next 18 months, Vince had quietly restructured his life like a master architect redesigning a building. He'd moved money, adjusted contracts, and positioned pieces on a chessboard that Linda and Bobby didn't even know they were playing on. Every book club meeting, every weekend that Tyler disappeared, every time Bobby called about the potential merger, Vince cataloged it all. The retirement party was Linda's idea, of course. She'd insisted on hosting it at their house, inviting colleagues, friends, and family to celebrate Vince's 30 years in construction. What she didn't know was that Vince had been counting down to this night for months, knowing it would be the perfect stage for the first act of his revenge. As the evening approached, Vince adjusted his tie in the bedroom mirror. Behind him, Linda was putting the finishing touches on her makeup, preparing to play the role of the devoted wife one last time. "You clean up nice for an old man," she said, her reflection smiling at him through the mirror. "Thank you," he replied, his voice carrying none of the warmth it once had. Tonight, everything would change. Tonight, the foundation he'd been quietly undermining for 18 months would finally start to crack. Chapter 2. The Inspection. The retirement party was in full swing by 7 p.m. Vince's colleagues from Morrison Construction filled the backyard, sharing stories and raising glasses to the man who'd built half the commercial real estate in the county. Linda played the perfect hostess, her laughter ringing out as she moved between groups, accepting compliments on the house, the food, and her husband's successful career. Bobby Hayes arrived fashionably late, as was his custom. At 48, he carried himself with the swagger of a man who'd never been told no by anyone who mattered. His tailored suit and Rolex caught the evening light as he made his rounds, slapping backs and name-dropping his latest acquisitions. To the casual observer, he was simply another colleague paying respects to a retiring peer. To Vince, he was a target that had just walked into range. Tyler had brought his girlfriend, Amanda Patterson, a 22-year-old marketing graduate who worked at her father's advertising firm. She was sweet enough, with brown curls and a nervous laugh. But Vince had noticed how she flinched every time Tyler spoke to her in public. His son had inherited Linda's talent for cruelty, though he lacked her subtlety. Quite a turnout, Bobby said, approaching Vince near the bar that had been set up on the patio. 30 years is impressive. Most guys in our business burn out after 20. I've always been thorough, Vince replied, accepting Bobby's handshake with a grip that lasted just a second too long. I believe in seeing projects through to completion. Bobby's smile faltered slightly, but he recovered quickly. About that merger proposal, I know you're retiring, but maybe we could discuss transitioning some of your contracts to Hayes Development. I'd hate to see all that expertise go to waste. I'm sure you would, Vince said, his tone neutral. Tell me, Bobby, what's your policy on structural integrity? The question caught Bobby off guard. I'm sorry, when you acquire a property, do you inspect the foundation first, or do you trust that it's solid? Bobby laughed nervously. Well, due diligence is important, but sometimes you have to trust your instincts and move fast in this market. Interesting philosophy, Vince said, taking a sip of his whiskey. I've always found that the most catastrophic failures happen when people assume the foundation is solid without actually checking. Before Bobby could respond, Linda appeared at his side, her hand briefly touching his arm in a gesture that would seem innocent to anyone who didn't know better. But Vince knew better. He'd been documenting these small intimacies for months. Bobby, I'm so glad you could make it, Linda said, her voice pitched just a little too high. Vince was just telling me how much he's looking forward to having more free time. I imagine you're both excited about the next chapter, Bobby said, his eyes lingering on Linda a moment too long. Oh, we have so many plans, Linda replied, her gaze meeting Bobby's with practiced casualness. Vince wants to travel, maybe buy a cabin somewhere remote. Vince almost smiled at that. Linda had never expressed any interest in traveling with him, and the idea of a remote cabin was probably her worst nightmare. But it was a useful fiction, one that supported the narrative they'd both been building about their happy marriage. As the evening progressed, Vince watched the two of them orbit each other like planets with a gravitational pull they thought was invisible. Bobby would find excuses to touch Linda's shoulder when they talked. Linda would laugh at his jokes, just a little too enthusiastically. They were good at it, Vince had to admit. If he hadn't seen them in Bobby's office, he might have missed the signs entirely. Tyler was holding court near the pool, regaling a group of his father's younger employees with stories about his post-graduation adventures. Amanda stood beside him, smiling on cue but growing paler with each drink Tyler consumed. The old man's been good to me, Tyler was saying, gesturing toward Vince with his beer bottle. But let's be honest, construction is a dying industry. The real money is in tech, crypto, that kind of thing. I've got some irons in the fire that are going to make his 30-year grind look like pocket change. One of Vince's foremen, a weathered man named Frank Rodriguez who'd worked with Vince for 15 years, shook his head. Your dad built this whole county, son. That's not pocket change, that's legacy. Legacy doesn't pay for a Tesla, Tyler replied with a laugh that made Frank wince. Vince had heard enough. He excused himself from his conversation with a group of subcontractors and walked over to where his son was performing for his audience. Tyler, he said quietly. Or, the tone was enough to make Tyler's bravado falter slightly. Sure, Dad. What's up? They stepped away from the group, moving to a quieter corner of the yard near the garden that Linda had insisted on installing 3 years ago. "I think you've had enough to drink tonight," Vince said simply. "Come on, Dad, it's a party." "I'm celebrating your retirement." "You're celebrating your own importance," Vince corrected. "And you're embarrassing Amanda in the process." Tyler's face flushed. "Amanda's fine. She can handle herself." "The question is whether you can handle yourself," Vince replied. "You're 23 years old, Tyler. When are you going to start acting like a man instead of a child who's angry at the world?" "Maybe when you start treating me like one," Tyler shot back, his voice rising slightly. "You've been holding me back my whole life, keeping me under your thumb, never giving me a chance to prove myself." Vince studied his son's face, seeing Linda's features reflected in the weak jawline and entitled expression. "I've given you every opportunity in the world. What you've done with them is your choice." "Right," Tyler said bitterly. "Everything's my fault. Nothing's ever good enough for Vincent Morrison, the perfect father, the perfect husband, the perfect everything." "I've never claimed to be perfect," Vince said. "But I've always kept my word, paid my debts, and honored my commitments. Can you say the same?" Tyler's silence was answer enough. Vince turned to walk away, but his son's voice stopped him. "You know she's cheating on you, right?" Vince turned back slowly, his expression unchanged. "Excuse me, Mom," Tyler said, emboldened by alcohol and frustration. "With Bobby Hayes. Everyone knows it except you, apparently. Hell, half the people at this party have seen them together." For a moment, father and son stared at each other across a gulf that had been widening for years. Then Vince nodded once, as if Tyler had just confirmed the weather forecast. "Thank you for telling me," he said simply. Tyler blinked, clearly expecting a different reaction. "That's it? That's all you're going to say? What would you like me to say?" "I don't know. Get angry. Fight for your marriage. Do something other than just stand there like a statue." Vince considered this for a moment. "Tyler," he said finally, "there's a difference between fighting for something and fighting for the right thing. You'll understand that someday." As he walked away, leaving his son standing alone by the garden, Vince felt a familiar calm settle over him. The pieces were all in position now. The foundation was ready to collapse. All he needed was the right moment to strike the final blow. Chapter 3: The Breaking Point. The retirement party had moved into its final phase by 10 p.m. The older guests had begun to leave, citing early meetings and family obligations, while the younger crowd had gravitated toward the pool area where Tyler was still drinking and growing increasingly belligerent with each beer. Vince found himself in the living room, surrounded by a group of his longest-standing colleagues and friends. Frank Rodriguez was there, along with several other foremen and project managers who'd worked with Vince through the lean years and the profitable ones. These were men who understood the value of hard work and keeping your word, qualities that seemed increasingly rare in Tyler's generation. To Vince Morrison, Frank said, raising his glass, "A man who builds things that last." The group raised their glasses in agreement, and Vince felt a genuine warmth for these men who'd stood beside him through 3 decades of challenges. Whatever happened next, he'd earned their respect honestly. Bobby Hayes appeared at the edge of the group, his face flushed from alcohol and his tie loosened in a way that was probably meant to look casual but came across as sloppy. "Mind if I join the toast?" "Of course," Vince said, though his colleagues shifted slightly to make room with obvious reluctance. Bobby's reputation in the construction community was well known. He was the kind of developer who squeezed contractors until they bled, then acted surprised when the work suffered. "Vince," Bobby said, his voice carrying the false bonhomie of a man who'd had too much to drink, "I've got to say, you've built an impressive empire here. This house, your business, your family. You're a lucky man." "Luck had very little to do with it," Frank interjected, his tone cool. Bobby laughed. "Well, sure, hard work and all that. But sometimes a man needs to know when he's peaked, you know? When it's time to step aside and let younger blood take over." The group fell silent. Even through the alcoholic haze, Bobby seemed to realize he'd crossed the line, but instead of backing down, he doubled down. "I mean, no offense, Vince, but your generation had it easy. You could build a strip mall and retire on the profits. These days, you need vision, connections, the ability to think big. Like sleeping with another man's wife." The question came from Tyler, who'd apparently staggered in from the pool area without anyone noticing. His words slurred slightly, but his meaning was crystal clear. The room went dead silent. Bobby's face went white, then red, then white again. Linda, who'd been moving through the crowd saying goodbye to guests, froze in the doorway. "Tyler," she said sharply, "you're drunk. Go upstairs." "Am I wrong, though?" Tyler continued, swaying slightly, but maintaining his focus on Bobby. "You want to talk about vision and connections? How about the vision to seduce a married woman and the connections that come with pillow talk?" Bobby's hands clenched into fists. "You little shit. I don't know what you think you know. I know my mother's been screwing you for over a year," Tyler said, his voice rising. "I know you've been using our family dinners to pump my dad for information about his contracts. And I know you think you're so fucking smart that no one's figured it out." Linda moved toward her son with murder in her eyes, but Vince's voice stopped her cold. "Tyler." The single word carried such quiet authority that even drunk, Tyler shut his mouth immediately. "That's enough." Vince looked around the room, noting the shocked faces of his colleagues, the mortified expression on Amanda's face, and the guilty fury radiating from both Linda and Bobby. Then he smiled, a cold, predatory expression that made everyone except Tyler take a step back. "Well," he said conversationally, "this is awkward." Bobby tried to rally. "Vince, look, I don't know what kind of lies this kid has been telling, but—" "Bobby," Vince interrupted, his voice still calm. "Stop talking." Something in his tone made Bobby's mouth snap shut. Vince walked to the bar cart and poured himself a fresh whiskey, taking his time, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. When he turned back to the room, his expression was almost pleasant. "You know, Bobby, you asked me earlier about structural integrity, about whether I inspect foundations before trusting they're solid." He took a sip of his drink. "The thing about foundations is that they can look perfectly sound from the surface. You might never know there's a problem until the whole structure comes crashing down." Bobby's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. "Vince, whatever you think is going on." "I don't think anything," Vince replied. "I know exactly what's going on. I've known for 18 months. The confession hit the room like a physical blow. Linda's face went chalk white, and Bobby actually staggered as if he'd been pushed. 18 months, Vince continued, savoring the words. "That's how long I've been watching, documenting, planning. Did you really think I wouldn't notice, Linda? The late meetings, the new lingerie, the way you suddenly started caring about Bobby's opinion on everything from wine to wallpaper." Linda's voice came out as a whisper. "Vince, I can explain." "No," he said simply. "You can't. Because there's no explanation that matters. You made your choice. Both of you did." Tyler, sobered by the gravity of what he'd unleashed, tried to interject. "Dad, I didn't mean to." "Yes, you did," Vince said, turning his attention to his son. "You absolutely meant to. You've been angry at me for years, Tyler, and tonight you finally found a weapon you thought would hurt. The problem is that you're too stupid to realize you just cut the rope you've been hanging from." "What's that supposed to mean?" Tyler demanded, but his bravado was cracking. Vince finished his drink and set the glass down with deliberate care. "It means that tomorrow you're going to learn what consequences feel like. All of you are." He looked around the room one more time, taking in the faces of his friends and colleagues who'd been forced to witness this ugly family theater. "Frank, would you mind making sure everyone gets home safely? I think the party's over." Frank nodded grimly. "You got it, Vince. You need anything." "I appreciate that," Vince said. "I'll be in touch." As his friends began to file out, casting worried glances back at him, Vince walked toward the stairs. He paused at the bottom, looking back at the three people who betrayed him in different ways. "Oh, and Bobby," he said casually, "you might want to call your lawyer in the morning. You're going to need him." Bobby found his voice at last. "Are you threatening me?" Vince smiled again, and this time there was no humanity in it at all. "Bobby, I don't make threats. I make promises. And I promise you that by this time next week, you're going to understand exactly what happens when you mistake my silence for weakness." He climbed the stairs without looking back, leaving the three of them standing in the wreckage of their lies. Behind him, he could hear Linda's voice rising in panic, Bobby's attempts at damage control, and Tyler's growing realization that he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. Vince Morrison had spent 18 months building the perfect trap. Tomorrow, he would spring it. Chapter 4. The Blueprint. Vince was awake before dawn, his internal clock unaffected by the previous night's revelations. He dressed in his usual work clothes, jeans, boots, and a flannel shirt that had seen 1,000 job sites, and made his way to the kitchen. The house was silent. Linda hadn't come to bed, and Tyler's car was gone from the driveway. Bobby's Porsche was nowhere to be seen. He brewed coffee and sat at the kitchen table, spreading out a collection of documents he'd retrieved from his home safe. 18 months of careful planning lay before him. Contracts, photographs, financial records, and a detailed timeline that would make an FBI investigator proud. But this wasn't about justice in any legal sense. This was about something far more personal. The first document was a contract Tyler had signed 6 months ago, co-signing for an $85,000 loan to finance what he called a revolutionary crypto venture. Tyler had used his trust fund as collateral, the trust fund that Vince had established and maintained, and which could be dissolved at Vince's discretion. The crypto venture had predictably failed, leaving Tyler responsible for a debt he couldn't pay and a monthly payment that exceeded his non-existent income. The second document was more interesting. It was a comprehensive background check on Robert Hayes, conducted by a private investigator Vince had hired 9 months ago. Bobby's financial empire, impressive as it appeared from the outside, was built on a foundation of leveraged debt and predatory loans. He owed money to people who didn't accept late payments gracefully, and his cash flow was entirely dependent on a steady stream of new developments and quick property flips. The third document was the crown jewel, a detailed analysis of Bobby's current project portfolio, cross-referenced with environmental impact studies that Vince had commissioned through shell companies. 3 of Bobby's major developments were built on contaminated land that should have been remediated before construction. The contamination was severe enough to trigger federal intervention if properly documented and reported. But Vince's plan went deeper than financial ruin or legal troubles. He understood that men like Bobby and Tyler responded only to personal humiliation and social destruction. Money could be replaced, legal troubles could be weathered, but reputation and respect, once lost, were nearly impossible to recover. At 7 a.m., Vince's phone rang. The caller ID showed Linda's number. "Hello. Vince, we need to talk." Linda's voice was strained, exhausted. "This whole thing has gotten out of hand." "I don't think so," Vince replied calmly. "I think it's just getting started." "Don't do this," she said, and he could hear desperation creeping in her voice. "Whatever you're planning, don't do this to our family." "Our family," Vince repeated. "Linda, you destroyed our family 18 months ago. I'm just documenting the damage." Tyler didn't mean what he said last night. He was drunk, he was angry. Tyler meant every word. Vince interrupted. And he was right to be angry. He's been watching his mother make a fool of his father for over a year. The question is why he chose last night to finally say something. Linda was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller. He's been asking Bobby for money. For his investments, his debts. Bobby's been saying no. Vince felt a grim satisfaction. Tyler hadn't exposed the affair out of moral outrage or concern for his father. He'd done it out of spite, after his mother's lover had refused to bankroll his latest failure. "Where are you now?" Vince asked. "Bobby's place. We need to figure out what to do." "I'll save you the trouble," Vince said. "You're going to pack your things and move out of my house. Today, Tyler can find somewhere else to live as well." "Vince, please." "I'm not finished," he continued. "You're also going to discover that the joint accounts have been frozen pending a forensic audit of our marital assets. The credit cards have been canceled, and the house, which you'll remember is in a trust that I control, is no longer available to you." He could hear her sharp intake of breath. "You can't do that." "I can, and I have. Check your purse, Linda. Try to use your credit card for coffee on the way home. You'll find it very educational." The line went quiet except for the sound of Linda's increasingly panicked breathing. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. "Because you made the mistake of thinking I was weak," Vince replied. "You and Bobby and Tyler all made the same mistake. You thought that because I didn't scream and fight and make scenes, I was just going to accept whatever you did to me. We can work this out, Linda said desperately. We could go to counseling. We can fix this. No, Vince said simply. We can't. Some things, once broken, can't be fixed. They can only be cleared away to make room for something new. He hung up before she could respond. At 8 a.m., Vince drove to his office at Morrison Construction for the last time as an active employee. His secretary, Mrs. Chun, had been with the company for 12 years and knew him well enough to recognize the difference between his usual quiet mood and something more dangerous. Mr. Morrison, she said carefully, there have been several calls this morning. Mr. Hayes called 3 times and Tyler called twice. I'll bet they did, Vince replied. Mrs. Chun, I need you to prepare a few documents for me. For the next 2 hours, Vince dictated a series of letters, contracts, and legal notifications. He terminated Tyler's employment with the company, effective immediately. He dissolved Tyler's trust fund, which was perfectly legal under the terms Vince had established 20 years earlier. He canceled the line of credit that Bobby's company had been using for quick project financing, a line of credit that Bobby didn't know was ultimately backed by Morrison Construction's assets. But the masterpiece was a detailed report to the Environmental Protection Agency, documenting the contaminated land that Bobby had developed without proper remediation. The report was meticulously researched, legally ironclad, and would trigger an immediate federal investigation that would freeze all of Bobby's current projects and expose him to millions in cleanup costs and penalties. At 10 a.m., Vince's phone rang again. This time it was Bobby. You son of a bitch. Bobby's voice was tight with rage. You think you can destroy me over some marriage bullshit? Bobby, Vince said pleasantly, I haven't even started destroying you yet. What you're feeling now is just the appetizer. I'll sue you into the ground. I'll take everything you have. With what money? Vince asked. Your line of credit was just canceled. Your EPA investigation starts Monday, and I happen to know you're about 90 days behind on payments to some very unfriendly people. How exactly are you planning to finance a legal war against me? The silence on the other end told Vince everything he needed to know. Here's what's going to happen, Bobby, Vince continued. You're going to discover that your reputation in this town is worth exactly nothing. The contractors who've been working with you are going to find better options. The banks that have been financing your projects are going to start asking uncomfortable questions. And the people you owe money to are going to start getting impatient. You can't do this, Bobby said, but his voice had lost its edge. I've already done it, Vince replied. The only question now is how long it takes you to figure out exactly how deep the hole is that you've dug for yourself. Vince hung up and turned to Mrs. Chun, who had been listening with growing amazement. Mrs. Chun, he said, would you mind calling the Grandview Gazette? I think they might be interested in a story about environmental violations in local development projects. As his secretary reached for the phone, Vince allowed himself a small smile. The foundation was cracking exactly as he'd planned. Soon, the entire structure would come crashing down. Chapter 5. The Demolition. By noon on Monday, Vince's war had moved from preparation to active destruction. He sat in his home office, methodically working through a checklist that would have impressed a military strategist. Each item represented another support beam removed from the lives of the people who had betrayed him. Tyler was the first to crack. He appeared at the front door at 12:30, looking like he hadn't slept in 2 days. His usual arrogance had been replaced by something approaching panic. Dad, he said when Vince opened the door, we need to talk. I don't think we do, Vince replied, but he stepped aside to let Tyler in. Tyler followed him to the kitchen, his hands shaking slightly as he tried to compose himself. Look, I know I screwed up at the party. I was drunk. I was angry. I said things I shouldn't have said. You said things that were true, Vince corrected. That's not quite the same thing. But I didn't mean to blow up your marriage, Tyler continued desperately. I was pissed off, and I want to hurt someone, and I was the easiest target, Vince finished, because you knew I wouldn't fight back. You knew I'd just stand there and take it. Tyler's face flushed. Tyler, Vince said, pouring himself a cup of coffee and not offering one to his son. Do you know what I discovered when I dissolved your trust fund this morning? Tyler went pale. You can't dissolve my trust fund. That's my money. It's money I put aside for you, managed by me, under terms that I established. And those terms include a clause that allows me to dissolve the trust if I determine that the beneficiary is using the funds in a manner detrimental to their own welfare or the welfare of the family. That's not legal. It's perfectly legal. I had the best estate attorneys in the state draft those documents. But here's the interesting part. Tyler, when I reviewed the trust's recent expenditures, I found some fascinating patterns. Vince pulled out a folder and spread several bank statements across the kitchen table. $85,000 to something called Crypto Future Holdings, which doesn't appear to exist anymore. $15,000 to a poker site that's currently under federal investigation for money laundering. $22,000 in cash withdrawals over the past 6 months, with no documentation of where that money went. Tyler's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. But my personal favorite, Vince continued, is this $30,000 payment to a company called Luxury Lifestyle Consulting. Want to guess what kind of consulting they provide? Tyler remained silent. Escort services, Tyler. High-end prostitutes for men who want to pretend there's something more than they are. You spent $30,000 of family money on whores. Dad, I can explain. No, Vince said simply. You can't. Because there's no explanation that makes this acceptable. You've been burning through money like a lottery winner with brain damage. And now you're going to learn what life looks like when a free ride ends. Tyler's desperation gave way to anger. Fine. You want to destroy your own son over mom's mistakes? Go ahead. But don't pretend this is about morality or family values. This is about your ego. You're right, Vince agreed. This is about my ego and my respect and my refusal to continue enabling a family of parasites who think my silence means I'm weak. Parasites. Tyler's voice rose. I'm your son. You're a 23-year-old man who's never held a real job, never paid his own bills, and apparently thinks prostitutes are a legitimate business expense. What exactly about that relationship am I supposed to cherish? Tyler stared at his father for a long moment, and Vince could see the exact instant when his son's last illusion shattered. Tyler had always assumed that no matter what he did, no matter how badly he behaved, his father would eventually forgive him and bail him out. Now he was realizing that assumption had been catastrophically wrong. You're really going to throw me away, Tyler said quietly. Over Mom and Bobby. I'm not throwing you away over them, Vince replied. I'm throwing you away because of who you've chosen to be. Your mother's affair was just the catalyst. The real problem is that you're a man with no character, no integrity, and no respect for anyone but yourself. Tyler's face twisted with rage and hurt. Well, fuck you too, Dad. I hope you're happy sitting alone in this house, counting your money and congratulating yourself on how righteous you are. I will be, Vince said. Thank you for asking. Tyler stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. Vince watched through the kitchen window as his son climbed into his car, a car that Vince had bought and insured, though Tyler would discover tomorrow that the insurance had been canceled and the registration was about to expire. At 2 p.m., Vince's phone rang. It was Frank Rodriguez, calling from a job site. Vince, Frank said, his voice tight with concern, we've got a problem. Bobby Hayes just showed up here with a court order, claiming he has a right to inspect our work on the Grandview project. What kind of court order? Vince asked, though he already knew the answer. Some kind of emergency injunction. He's claiming we used substandard materials, that the work doesn't meet code, that kind of bullshit. He's got lawyers with him and everything. Vince smiled. Bobby was panicking, grasping at straws, trying to find some way to strike back. It was exactly what Vince had expected. Frank, he said, do me a favor. Let him inspect whatever he wants. Give him full access, complete cooperation. Make sure the lawyers see everything they want to see. Are you sure? This feels like trouble. Trust me, Vince said. This is exactly what we want. Because what Bobby didn't know was that Vince had been preparing for this exact scenario for months. Every material used on the Grandview project was not just up to code. It exceeded code by significant margins. Every permit was not just in order. It was backed up by redundant documentation and independent inspections. Bobby would find absolutely nothing wrong with the construction, which would make his desperate legal maneuver look like exactly what it was: the flailing of a desperate man. More importantly, Bobby's court filing would create a public record of his accusations against Morrison Construction, which would allow Vince to file a countersuit for defamation and tortious interference with business relationships. That countersuit would open Bobby's business practices to discovery, which would expose all the corners he'd cut and all the rules he'd bent over the years. Bobby thought he was launching an attack. In reality, he was walking into a trap that would destroy what remained of his credibility and his business. At 4 p.m., Vince received a call from his lawyer, confirming that the EPA investigation into Bobby's development projects had officially begun. Federal investigators were already on site at 2 of Bobby's properties, and the local media had picked up the story. By evening, Bobby Hayes would be the lead story on every news outlet in the county. At 6 p.m., Linda called. "Vince," she said, her voice hollow, "I'm at Bobby's house. The federal agents are here. They're asking about you, about Morrison Construction, about whether you had any involvement in Bobby's projects." "And what are you telling them?" Vince asked. "The truth. That you never worked with Bobby, that you always said his company was sloppy and cut corners." "That is the truth," Vince confirmed. "I've never done business with Bobby Hayes, and I never would have." "They're going to destroy him," Linda said quietly. "They're talking about criminal charges, about federal prison." "I imagine they are. He's not a bad man, Vince. He made mistakes, but he's not evil." Vince considered this for a moment. "Linda," he said finally, "Bobby Hayes knowingly built residential developments on contaminated land. He exposed families to toxic chemicals because proper remediation would have cut into his profit margins." "What would you call that?" Linda was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. "I want to come home." "This isn't your home anymore," Vince replied. "It never really was. You just lived here." "Vince, please. I know I made mistakes, but we can fix this. We can work through this." "No," he said simply. "We can't. Some things can't be fixed, Linda. They can only be ended." As he hung up the phone, Vince looked around the house where he'd spent 15 years building a life with people who had never truly been on his side. Tomorrow, the demolition would be complete. By the end of the week, Bobby Hayes would be facing federal charges and financial ruin. Tyler would be learning what life looked like without a safety net. And Linda would be discovering that her choices had consequences she'd never imagined. Vince Morrison had spent his career building things that lasted. Now he was learning that sometimes the most important thing you could build was the destruction of people who deserved it. Chapter 6: The Reckoning. Thursday morning brought news that exceeded even Vince's expectations. Bobby Hayes had been arrested at 6 a.m. on federal charges of environmental fraud, conspiracy to violate the Clean Water Act, and endangering public health. The arrest had been coordinated with raids on his offices and construction sites, where FBI agents had seized computers, files, and financial records dating back 5 years. Vince learned about the arrest not from the news, but from Tyler, who called at 7 a.m. in a state of complete panic. "Dad, you have to help me," Tyler said without preamble. "The FBI was at my apartment this morning. They're asking about money Bobby gave me, about whether I knew about his business practices." "Did Bobby give you money?" Vince asked, though he already suspected the answer. He helped me out a few times. When I was short on rent, when the crypto thing went bad. But I didn't know anything about contaminated land or federal violations or any of that shit." "How much money, Tyler?" "I don't know, maybe 40,000 total, but it wasn't for anything illegal. It was just loans, personal loans between friends." Vince almost laughed. Tyler had been taking money from a man who was sleeping with his mother, money that had likely come from fraudulent development deals, and he was surprised that federal investigators found this interesting. "Tyler," Vince said, "you need a lawyer. A good one. And you need to stop talking to anyone about anything until you have one." "I can't afford a lawyer. You canceled my trust fund, remember? I've got maybe $300 to my name." "Then you should probably find a public defender," Vince replied. "Or maybe ask your mother's boyfriend to recommend someone." "Oh, wait, he's in federal custody. This is your fault." Tyler exploded. "You did this. You destroyed Bobby to get back at Mom, and now I'm caught in the middle." "No," Vince said calmly. "This is your fault. You took money from a criminal, Tyler. You took money that wasn't legitimately earned from a man who was destroying the environment and endangering families for profit. The fact that you didn't know he was a criminal just means you're stupid, not innocent. Tyler's voice became desperate. Dad, please. I know I fucked up. I know I've been a disappointment, but I'm still your son. You can't just let me hang out here. Watch me, Vince said, and hung up. At 9 a.m., Vince drove to the Morrison Construction offices to finalize the transition of his company to his partner and longtime friend, Frank Rodriguez. It was a partnership they discussed for years, and Frank had the experience and integrity to run the company successfully. More importantly, Frank understood Vince's standards and would maintain the reputation for quality that Morrison Construction had built over 3 decades. Health of a week, Frank said as they signed the final paperwork. Bobby Hayes in federal custody. Your boy Tyler apparently mixed up in money laundering, and Linda, well, I guess Linda's learning what it's like to pick the wrong horse. It's been educational, Vince agreed. Frank studied his former partner's face. You don't seem surprised by any of this. I'm not. Vince, Frank said carefully, I've known you for 15 years. You're not the kind of man who gets blindsided by his wife's affair. And you're definitely not the kind of man who lets it go without a response. Vince signed the last document and slid it across the desk. Frank, sometimes the best response to betrayal is patience. People who think they're smarter than you will eventually prove they're not. Frank nodded slowly. And sometimes they'll prove it in spectacular fashion. Sometimes they will, Vince agreed. At 11 a.m., Vince received a call from his lawyer with an update on the Bobby Hayes situation. The federal investigation had uncovered evidence of a pattern of environmental fraud spanning multiple developments over 5 years. Bobby was facing a minimum of 10 years in federal prison if convicted, and the cleanup costs for the contaminated properties could exceed $20 million, money that Bobby's company didn't have. But the real revelation was that the investigation had also uncovered evidence of systematic bribery and corruption. Bobby had been paying off local building inspectors, environmental officials, and zoning board members to overlook violations and fast-track approvals. The corruption investigation was likely to expose dozens of other officials and potentially trigger a complete overhaul of the county's development oversight system. It's a complete disaster for everyone involved, the lawyer told Vince. Hayes is finished, his company is bankrupt, and half the county government is going to be under federal investigation. Terrible shame, Vince said, not sounding particularly upset about it. At 1 p.m., Linda arrived at the house. She looked like she'd aged 5 years in the past week, her usually perfect hair unwashed and her designer clothes wrinkled. She no longer looked like the confident woman who'd been sneaking around behind his back. She looked like what she was, a middle-aged woman who'd made catastrophically bad choices and was finally facing the consequences. Vince, she said when he answered the door, we need to talk. About what? He replied, not inviting her in. About what's going to happen now. About Tyler, about the house, about our divorce. Our divorce is going to be simple, Vince said. You're going to get exactly what you brought to this marriage, which was nothing. The house, the business, the investments, all of that stays with me. That's not how divorce works in this state, Linda said, trying to summon some of her old defiance. I'm entitled to half of everything we built together. We didn't build anything together, Vince replied. I built everything while you spent it. And you're going to discover that proving your contribution to a 30-year marriage is difficult when you've spent the last 18 months committing adultery with a federal criminal. Linda's face crumpled. You're really going to destroy me over this. Linda, Vince said patiently, I'm not destroying you. You destroyed yourself. I'm just declining to save you from the consequences. What about Tyler? Are you really going to let your own son go to prison? Tyler's not going to prison, Vince said. He's too small a fish for the federal prosecutors to care about. He'll probably get probation and community service, assuming he can convince them he was just stupid instead of malicious. And then what? What's he supposed to do with his life? He's supposed to figure that out himself, Vince replied. He's 23 years old, Linda. It's time he learned how to be an adult. Linda stared at him for a long moment, as if she was seeing him clearly for the first time in years. You planned all of this, she said quietly. The investigation, the arrests, the timing. You orchestrated all of it. I provided information to the appropriate authorities, Vince said. What they did with that information was their choice. You destroyed Bobby's life. Bobby destroyed his own life. I just documented it. Linda's voice became small, almost childlike. What am I supposed to do now? Vince considered the question seriously. You're 45 years old, Linda. You have a college degree and 18 months of experience lying to people who trusted you. I'm sure you'll figure something out. He started to close the door, but Linda's voice stopped him. I loved you, she said desperately. At the beginning, I really loved you. Vince paused, looking at this woman who'd shared his bed for 15 years and his life for even longer. I know you did, he said finally. That's what makes this so unforgivable. As he closed the door, Vince reflected on the destruction he'd orchestrated over the past week. Bobby Hayes was finished, facing federal prison and financial ruin that would follow him for the rest of his life. Tyler was learning that actions had consequences and that his father's patience had limits. And Linda was discovering that betrayal was a luxury she couldn't afford. But this was only the beginning. The real reckoning was yet to come. Chapter 7: The Collapse. 2 weeks after Bobby's arrest, the full scope of the scandal had become clear. The federal investigation had metastasized into a multi-agency probe involving the FBI, EPA, IRS, and State Attorney General's office. 47 people had been arrested or indicted, including 3 county commissioners, 5 building inspectors, and the entire zoning board. The local media was calling it the largest corruption scandal in the county's history. Vince watched the coverage from his home office, methodically working through his files and preparing for the next phase of his plan. Bobby's arrest had been satisfying, but was only the first movement in a larger symphony of destruction that Vince had been composing for months. Tyler had managed to avoid federal charges, but not consequences. Unable to afford a private attorney, he'd been assigned a public defender who negotiated a plea deal requiring full cooperation with federal investigators, 2 years of probation, and community service. More importantly for Vince's purposes, Tyler's cooperation had included detailed statements about Bobby's financial relationship with the Morrison family. Statements that painted Tyler as a victim of manipulation rather than a willing participant in corruption. The irony wasn't lost on Vince that Tyler's natural tendency towards self-pity and blame-shifting had actually helped him avoid prison. Tyler was so convincingly pathetic in his interviews with federal agents that they concluded he was too stupid and self-absorbed to be part of any conspiracy. Linda had moved into a small apartment across town, taking a job as a receptionist at a dental office, the first paying job she'd held in 20 years. The woman who'd once spent Vince's money on designer clothes and expensive vacations was now answering phones for $12 an hour and learning how to budget for groceries. But Vince wasn't finished with any of them. On a Thursday morning in October, Tyler appeared at the house unannounced. He looked thinner than he had 2 weeks earlier, and his usual arrogance had been replaced by something approaching humility. "Dad," he said when Vince opened the door, "I need to ask you something." "Ask away," Vince replied, not inviting him in. "Did you know?" Tyler asked. "When you planned all this, when you set up Bobby and destroyed Mom's life, did you know I was going to get caught up in it?" Vince considered the question. "Yes." Tyler's face went white. "You knew the FBI would investigate me?" "I knew that anyone who'd taken money from Bobby Hayes would face scrutiny," Vince said. "I also knew that you'd taken money from him because I've been monitoring your financial activity since you turned 18. You've been spying on me for 5 years." "I've been watching out for you for 5 years," Vince corrected. "There's a difference. And what I saw was a young man with no judgment, no self-control, and no understanding of consequences." Tyler's voice cracked. "So you decided to teach me about consequences by destroying my life?" "I decided to stop protecting you from the consequences of your own choices," Vince replied. "Everything that happened to you, Tyler, was the result of decisions you made. I just stopped cleaning up the mess. I could have gone to prison." "Yes," Vince agreed. "You could have. The fact that you didn't is a testament to your attorney's skill and the federal prosecutor's mercy, not to your innocence." Tyler stared at his father for a long moment, and Vince could see the wheels turning in his son's head as he tried to process the reality of his situation. You really hate me, Tyler said finally. No, Vince said. I don't hate you. Hatred requires emotional investment, and I don't have any emotional investment in you anymore. The brutality of the statement hit Tyler like a physical blow. I'm your son. You're a man who shares my DNA and my last name, Vince replied. Beyond that, we have nothing in common. Tyler's composure finally cracked completely. Dad, please. I know I fucked up. I know I've been a disappointment, but I can change. I can be better. No, Vince said simply. You can't. Because change requires character, and character requires the ability to accept responsibility for your actions. You just spent 5 minutes trying to blame me for the consequences of your own choices. Then what am I supposed to do? Tyler demanded. How am I supposed to live with knowing that my own father considers me worthless? Vince thought about this question for a moment. Tyler, he said finally, for the past 23 years, you've lived with my financial support, my connections, and my protection for consequences. Now you're going to learn what life looks like when you have to earn those things yourself. And if I can't, then you'll fail, Vince said. And that will be your choice, not mine. As Tyler walked away, Vince felt no satisfaction, no triumph, no sense of justice served. He felt only the cold completion of a necessary task. Tyler had been given every advantage in life and had chosen to waste them all. There was nothing left to do but let him face the world on his own terms. That afternoon, Vince received a call from his private investigator with news about Bobby Hayes. Bobby's legal troubles had multiplied beyond the federal charges. The families affected by the contaminated developments had filed a class action lawsuit seeking damages for health problems and property devaluation. Several environmental groups had joined the lawsuit, seeking punitive damages and demanding criminal prosecution at the state level as well as federal. But the most interesting development was personal. Bobby's wife had filed for divorce and was seeking an emergency restraining order, claiming that Bobby had become violent and threatening as his legal troubles mounted. She was also seeking sole custody of their 2 children and had moved them out of state to live with her parents. It gets better, the investigator told Vince. Hayes' business partners have all filed lawsuits to dissolve their partnerships and recover their investments. His company's assets are being liquidated to pay legal fees and settlement costs. And the IRS has frozen his personal accounts pending a tax fraud investigation. How is he holding up personally? Vince asked. Not well. My sources say he's drinking heavily, barely sleeping, and spending most of his time with lawyers who are billing him $300 an hour to tell him how fucked he is. Vince thanked the investigator and hung up, satisfied that Bobby Hayes was experiencing the full weight of consequences he'd avoided for years. Men like Bobby operated under the assumption that their wealth and connections made them untouchable. Discovering that assumption was wrong was always a devastating experience. That evening, Linda called. Vince, she said, her voice smaller than he'd ever heard it. Tyler told me about your conversation today. Did he? He said you told him you have no emotional investment in him anymore. That's correct. Linda was quiet for a long moment. Is that how you feel about me, too? Vince considered the question carefully. Linda, he said finally, you were my wife for 15 years. You were the mother of my child, my partner in building a life together. I loved you completely and trusted you absolutely. And now you're a stranger who used to live in my house. He could hear her crying softly on the other end of the line. When she spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. I'm sorry, Vince. I'm so sorry for everything. I know you are, he replied. But apologies don't undo betrayal, Linda. They just acknowledge it. As he hung up the phone, Vince realized that the destruction phase of his plan was nearly complete. Bobby Hayes was facing decades in prison and financial ruin. Tyler was learning to navigate life without a safety net. Linda was discovering what independence looked like when you were starting over at 45. But there was still one more act to play out. One final lesson to teach about the price of betrayal and the cost of assuming that Vincent Morrison's silence meant weakness. The reckoning was almost complete. Chapter 8, The Final Move. Spring came early to the county, and with it came the culmination of the federal prosecution that had consumed the local news for months. Bobby Hayes had pled guilty to 14 federal charges in exchange for a recommended sentence of 12 years in federal prison and forfeiture of all his business assets. The plea hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in April, and Vince planned to attend. He arrived at the federal courthouse early, taking a seat in the back of the gallery where he could observe without drawing attention. The courtroom gradually filled with reporters, FBI agents, federal prosecutors, and a handful of Bobby's former associates who had managed to avoid prosecution themselves. Bobby looked nothing like the confident, swaggering man who had attended Vince's retirement party 8 months earlier. He'd lost at least 30 pounds. His expensive suits had been replaced by an ill-fitting public defender special, and his once perfect hair was showing gray at the roots. When he entered the courtroom in handcuffs, flanked by federal marshals, he looked like exactly what he was, a broken man facing the destruction of everything he'd spent his life building. The hearing itself was brief and procedural. Bobby answered the judge's questions in a quiet, defeated voice, confirming his understanding of the charges and his decision to plead guilty. When asked if he wished to make a statement before sentencing, he declined. But as Bobby was led away in handcuffs, his eyes found Vince in the gallery. For a moment, the two men stared at each other across the courtroom. Bobby's expression was a mixture of rage, defeat, and something that might have been respect. He knew exactly who was responsible for his downfall, and he knew there was nothing he could do about it. Vince nodded once, a gesture that acknowledged Bobby's recognition without gloating. Then Bobby was gone, led away to begin a federal prison sentence that would consume the rest of his productive life. Outside the courthouse, Vince was approached by a young reporter from the local newspaper who had been covering the corruption scandal. "Mr. Morrison," she said, "I'm Rebecca Santos from the Grandview Gazette. Could I ask you a few questions about the Hayes case?" "I'm not sure what I could tell you that would be useful," Vince replied politely. "Well, several sources have indicated that your company's environmental reports were instrumental in triggering the federal investigation. And there are allegations that Hayes had been targeting your business for acquisition as part of his expansion plans." Vince smiled slightly. "Ms. Santos, I've been in the construction business for 30 years. In that time, I've learned that the most important thing you can do is maintain high standards and document everything carefully. Sometimes that documentation proves useful in unexpected ways." "Are you saying you knew Hayes was violating environmental regulations?" "I'm saying that anyone who did business in this county and paid attention to details would have noticed irregularities in how certain projects were approved and executed," Vince replied. "The question is whether they chose to do anything about it." The reporter scribbled notes furiously. "And you chose to do something about it?" "I chose to provide relevant information to the appropriate authorities," Vince said. "What they did with that information was their decision." "What about the personal aspect? Hayes was reportedly involved with your ex-wife." Vince's expression didn't change. "Ms. Santos, my personal life is private. But I will say this. A man's character is revealed not by what he does when people are watching, but by what he does when he thinks no one will find out." The reporter looked up from her notes. "Are you talking about Hayes or about yourself?" "I'm talking about both of us," Vince replied. That evening, Vince drove to Tyler's apartment. His son was living in a rundown complex on the wrong side of town, sharing a 2-bedroom unit with a roommate he'd found on Craigslist. It was a far cry from the luxury he'd grown up with, but it was what Tyler could afford on his salary from the construction job Frank Rodriguez had reluctantly given him. Tyler answered the door in work clothes that were actually dirty from honest labor. The past 8 months had changed him in ways that Vince hadn't expected. The soft edges of privilege had been worn away by necessity, and there was something in his son's eyes that hadn't been there before, the beginning of self-respect earned through effort rather than entitlement. "Dad," Tyler said, surprise evident in his voice. "What are you doing here?" "I wanted to see how you were doing," Vince replied. Tyler stepped aside to let him in. The apartment was small and cheaply furnished, but it was clean and organized. Vince could see textbooks on a table near the window. Tyler was apparently taking night classes in construction management. "I'm doing okay," Tyler said, following his father's gaze to the books. "Frank's been teaching me the business from the ground up, starting at the bottom, learning how things actually work instead of just talking about them." "How do you like it?" Tyler considered the question. It's hard. Harder than I thought it would be. But it's honest, you know. When I fuck up, it's my fault. And when I do good work, I earned it. They stood in awkward silence for a moment before Tyler spoke again. I saw the news about Bobby's sentencing. 12 years. Yes. Do you feel satisfied? Getting your revenge? Vince thought about the question. Tyler, he said finally, this was never about revenge. It was about consequences. Bobby Hayes spent years cutting corners, violating regulations, and endangering people for profit. Those actions had consequences, and he finally had to face them. And Mom? And me? What were our consequences for? Your mother's consequences were for betraying her marriage and her family, Vince replied. Your consequences were for taking money from a criminal and assuming that I would always be there to clean up your mistakes. Tyler nodded slowly. And now you're learning to be a man instead of a child, Vince said. It's hard work, but it's the most important work you'll ever do. Tyler was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different, more mature than Vince had ever heard it. Dad, he said, I know I don't have any right to ask this, and I know I haven't earned it, but is there any chance we could have a relationship again someday? Well, I've proven that I've changed. Vince studied his son's face, looking for signs of manipulation or false sentiment. But what he saw was genuine uncertainty and something that might have been hope. Tyler, he said carefully, change isn't something you prove with words. It's something you demonstrate with actions, over time, consistently. If you can do that, if you can become a man of character and integrity, then we can talk about having a relationship. How long? Tyler asked. As long as it takes, Vince replied. As he drove home, Vince reflected on the conversation. Tyler was beginning to understand the difference between privilege and respect, between entitlement and earning. It was possible that the destruction of his comfortable life might actually save him in the end. Linda, on the other hand, was a different story entirely. She called later that evening. Vince, she said, I heard about Bobby's sentencing on the news. Did you? 12 years. He'll be 60 when he gets out. If he gets out. If he serves his full sentence, yes. Linda was quiet for a moment. I went to see him before the hearing. To say goodbye. How is he? Broken, she said simply. Completely broken. He keeps talking about how you destroyed him, how you planned everything, how you're some kind of criminal mastermind. And what do you think? I think, Linda said slowly, that you're exactly who you always were. You just stopped protecting us from the consequences of our choices. It was, Vince realized, the most insightful thing Linda had said in years. Linda, he said, I want you to understand something. What happened to Bobby, what happened to Tyler, what happened to you? None of it was punishment. It was just the natural result of the choices you made. I know, she said quietly. I finally understand that. Good, Vince replied. Understanding consequences is the first step toward making better choices. After he hung up, Vince poured himself a whiskey and sat in his home office, looking out at the garden where Linda had once entertained her book club friends with stories about her perfect marriage. The house was quiet now, peaceful in a way it hadn't been for years. Vincent Morrison had spent 8 months systematically destroying the lives of everyone who had betrayed him. But as he sat in the silence of his empty house, he realized that destruction had never been the goal. The goal had been truth, the truth about character, about consequences, and about the price of betrayal. Some lessons could only be learned through devastation. And some people could only find redemption after losing everything they thought they valued. The reckoning was complete. Chapter 9, The New Foundation. 1 year after Bobby Hayes' sentencing, Vincent Morrison stood on the construction site of his latest project, a community center in the part of town where Tyler now lived. It wasn't a Morrison construction project. Vince had officially retired from the business he'd built over 30 years. But he'd personally funded the community center and was overseeing its construction as a volunteer project. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was building something in the neighborhood where his son had learned to rebuild his life from the ground up. Tyler arrived at the site at lunchtime, as he did most days when his work schedule allowed. He'd been promoted twice in the past year, earning recognition for his attention to detail and his willingness to work harder than anyone expected. Frank Rodriguez had told Vince that Tyler was becoming one of his most reliable foremen, a young man who led by example rather than entitlement. "How's it coming along?" Tyler asked, studying the progress on the center's main hall. "On schedule and under budget," Vince replied. "Your friend Martinez did excellent work on the electrical systems." Tyler smiled at that. Martinez was his roommate, an electrician who'd taught Tyler more about practical skills in the past year than he'd learned in 4 years of college. More importantly, Martinez had taught Tyler about earning respect through competence rather than connections. "Dad," Tyler said, using the word for the first time in months, "I wanted to tell you something." Vince stopped reviewing the blueprints and gave his son his full attention. "I've been saving money," Tyler continued. "Not much, but some every month. I want to pay you back for the trust fund money I wasted. It's going to take me a long time, but I want to pay back every dollar." Vince studied his son's face. "Why?" "Because it was my responsibility, and I fucked it up. Because taking your money and throwing it away was stealing from you, even if it was legal. And because I want to know that I can earn things instead of just taking them." It was, Vince realized, the first time Tyler had ever talked about taking responsibility for something without trying to justify his actions or blame someone else. "All right," Vince said simply. "We can work out a payment plan." Tyler nodded gratefully. "There's something else. I'm thinking about going back to school. Not for business, for engineering. Frank thinks I might have a talent for structural design." "What made you interested in that?" Tyler gestured toward the community center taking shape around them. "Watching you work on this project. Seeing how you think about not just what you're building, but why you're building it and how long it needs to last. It's not just construction. It's creating something that serves a purpose." Vince felt something he hadn't experienced in years when thinking about his son: pride. "Engineering is good work," he said. "Honest work." "That's what I'm learning," Tyler replied. "That honest work is the only kind that actually matters." That evening, Vince drove to Linda's apartment. She called him earlier in the week, asking if they could talk. He'd agreed, though he wasn't sure what they still had to discuss. Linda met him at the door, wearing the kind of simple clothes she'd never worn during their marriage: jeans, a sweater, minimal makeup. She looked older than her 46 years, but there was something in her expression that hadn't been there before: peace. "Thank you for coming," she said, leading him to the small living room. "I know this is awkward. What did you want to talk about?" Vince asked. Linda sat down across from him, her hands folded in her lap. "I wanted to tell you that I'm getting married." Vince raised an eyebrow. "Congratulations." "Anyone I know." "His name is David Miller. He's a teacher at the high school where I've been working as a counselor. He's a good man, Vince. Nothing like Bobby." "I'm glad you're happy," Vince said, and found that he meant it. "He knows about everything," Linda continued. "About the affair, about Bobby, about how our marriage ended. I told him all of it because I didn't want to start something new with lies." "That was wise." Linda smiled sadly. "It took me a long time to learn the difference between wisdom and cleverness. I thought I was being smart, having my affair, keeping my options open. I thought I could have everything I wanted without anyone getting hurt. And now I understand that every choice has a price," she said, "and that the price of dishonesty is always higher than you think it's going to be." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Linda spoke again. "Vince," she said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "All right." "When you destroyed Bobby, when you let Tyler face consequences, when you divorced me and left me with nothing, were you trying to teach us lessons, or were you just punishing us?" Vince thought about the question for a long time. "Both," he said finally. "I was angry, Linda, angrier than I'd ever been in my life. And yes, part of me wanted you all to suffer the way I was suffering. And the other part wanted you to understand that actions have consequences. That betrayal isn't something you can just apologize for and move on from. That respect and trust, once lost, have to be earned back through years of consistent behavior." Linda nodded. "I think I understand that now. It took losing everything, but I understand it. Are you happy?" Vince asked. "I'm learning to be," Linda replied. "For the first time in my life, I'm earning my own money, making my own decisions, living with the consequences of my own choices. It's scary, but it's also honest." As Vince drove home, He reflected on how much had changed in the 2 years since his retirement party. Bobby Hayes was serving his federal sentence in a minimum security prison. His wife had divorced him, and his children barely knew him. Tyler was learning to be a man through hard work and responsibility. Linda was learning to find happiness through honesty rather than manipulation. And Vince himself had learned something unexpected, that the most devastating revenge wasn't destruction for its own sake, but forcing people to confront the truth about themselves and their choices. The house felt different when he walked in that evening. Not empty, but peaceful. He poured himself a whiskey and sat in his study, looking at the framed photograph on his desk, a picture of the community center's groundbreaking ceremony. In the background, barely visible, Tyler could be seen working alongside the other construction crew members. Vincent Morrison had spent his career building structures that would last generations. But his greatest construction project had been the slow, careful rebuilding of his son's character from the ground up. It had required tearing down everything Tyler thought he knew about himself and starting over with a foundation of honesty, responsibility, and earned respect. Some structures could only be built on the ruins of what came before. And some lessons could only be learned when everything you thought you knew about yourself was stripped away, leaving only the choice between growth and collapse. Vince raised his glass in a silent toast to the future, to Tyler's engineering studies, to Linda's second chance at honest happiness, and to the community center that would serve families for generations to come. The foundation was solid now. Everything built on it would last. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Hello, and welcome to Infidelity Tales Lab. Your support means everything to us. We'd love to know, which geographical location are you joining from today? At home? On the go? Share with us below. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. Foundations of Betrayal. Russell Montgomery surveyed the sprawling lakeside property from his home office window. At 42, he'd built everything from nothing. Sentinel Security Solutions had made him wealthy, respected, and envied. The company specialized in high-end security systems for the elite, protection that went far beyond basic alarms. His military background and special operations training had given him the skills and connections to build an empire. "Daddy, look what I made." 6-year-old Leo bounded into the office, clutching a drawing. Russell knelt to examine his son's artwork. "That's incredible, buddy. Is that us fishing?" "Yeah, like last weekend at the cabin. Mom said we're going hiking with Grandpa Howard and Grandma Patricia this weekend." Russell's smile tightened. His in-laws had always treated him with thinly veiled contempt. Howard Blackwell had made his fortune in real estate development and viewed Russell as beneath their social standing, despite Russell's success. Patricia Blackwell was equally cold, always whispering suggestions in Audrey's ear about how she could do better. Speaking of Audrey, his wife of 8 years glided into the room. With her honey blonde hair and piercing blue eyes, she still turned heads at charity galas and business functions. "Leo, I told you not to disturb your father when he's working," Audrey said, her tone lilting but with an edge. "He's never disturbing me," Russell replied, ruffling his son's hair. "We got a big contract with the Nolan family. I could use a break." Something flashed in Audrey's eyes. "The Nolans? Brady Nolan's family?" "Yes, why?" "No reason." Audrey smiled smoothly. "Just surprised. Howard knows them from the country club." Small world. Later that evening, after tucking Leo in a bed, Russell passed by the guest room where Audrey was on the phone, speaking in hushed tones. "Perfect opportunity, yes, this weekend. Brady says he's verified it. Substantial." Her voice dropped even lower. $40 million in offshore accounts. "No, Leo won't be a problem." Russell quietly retreated, his mind racing. Brady Nolan, his newest client, was apparently communicating with his wife behind his back. And what did she mean Leo wouldn't be a problem? Over the next few days, Russell noticed more irregularities. Audrey making secretive calls, new passwords on her devices, long lunches with people she wouldn't name, and multiple conversations with her parents that ended abruptly when he entered the room. He'd never been naive. Before founding Sentinel, Russell had served in military intelligence. His instincts for danger had saved his life multiple times in war zones across the globe. Those same instincts were now screaming at him. On Thursday night, he installed a small recording device in Audrey's car, one of his company's newest prototypes. That evening, he listened to a conversation that chilled his blood. "Brady, are you sure this will work?" Audrey's voice was clear through the speaker. "Trust me," a man's voice responded. "Your husband won't suspect a thing until it's too late. The hiking trail is perfect, isolated, dangerous. One push, and both problems are solved." "Both?" "You promised Leo wouldn't." "Think, Audrey. If only Russell dies, where does the money go?" "To Leo, with you as trustee. But if both of them have an accident, everything passes directly to you as next of kin." A pause. "You're right. And my parents? We'll make sure there are no witnesses. Once it's done, we wait a respectable amount of time, then—" The man, Brady, laughed softly. "Then we'll have everything we ever wanted." Russell sat motionless, the recording continuing to play. His son's life was in danger, threatened by the woman who had given birth to him and the grandparents who should have protected him. The betrayal was absolute. He wouldn't confront them. Not yet. Russell Montgomery hadn't survived 3 tours in hostile territory by being predictable. He would go on this hiking trip, but he would be prepared, and they would learn why crossing him was the last mistake they would ever make. Chapter 2. The Precipice. "Are you excited for our adventure, Leo?" Russell asked as he loaded the final bag into their SUV early Saturday morning. "Yeah," Grandpa Howard said. "There's a super cool waterfall." Leo bounced on his toes, adventure backpack already strapped on. Audrey emerged from the house, sunglasses hiding her eyes. "Let's not keep my parents waiting." Her voice was light, but Russell detected the underlying tension. During the hour-long drive to the trailhead, Russell observed Audrey checking her phone repeatedly. He'd spent the previous night planning, remembering his training. In his pocket was a specialized GPS beacon. Inside his hiking boots were reinforced steel shanks. Under his clothes, a thin protective layer of military-grade material. In his backpack, supplies that could mean survival. Most importantly, he'd given Leo precise instructions that morning while Audrey was showering. His son had looked confused, but had nodded solemnly when Russell impressed upon him the importance of following these instructions exactly. Howard and Patricia Blackwell waited at the trailhead parking lot, standing beside their luxury SUV. Howard, tall, silver-haired, with calculating eyes, greeted them with false hardiness. "There's my favorite grandson," he boomed, ignoring Russell completely. Patricia, elegant even in hiking clothes, kissed Audrey's cheeks. "Darling, you look tired." "Everything all right. Just fine, Mother," Audrey replied. "Is Brady joining us today?" Russell noticed the quick glance exchanged between the elder Blackwells. "No, dear," Patricia said. "Just family today." The trail started easily enough, a gentle slope through pine forest. Leo ran ahead, pointing out squirrels and unusual rocks. Russell kept him within sight at all times. Howard led the way, Patricia behind him, then Audrey with Russell and Leo bringing up the rear. 2 hours into the hike, they reached a fork in the trail. "This way," Howard called, pointing to the narrower path. "Best view is up this trail." Russell knew from his research that this path led to a precipitous overlook above jagged rocks. The perfect accident spot. As they climbed higher, the trail narrowed further, with a sheer drop on one side. Russell counted Howard, checking his watch 3 times in 30 minutes. Audrey's posture grew increasingly tense. "Look, Leo," Russell pointed. "See that eagle?" Leo looked up, momentarily distracted. "When you hear me say eagle again," Russell whispered, "I need you to follow those special instructions I gave you this morning. Understand?" Leo nodded, eyes serious beyond his years. They reached a spectacular overlook. Below, jagged rocks jutted from the canyon floor nearly 200 feet down. The perfect murder scene, isolated, dangerous, with no witnesses. "Magnificent view," Howard declared, standing well back from the edge. Russell, Bring Leo up closer to see the waterfall on the far side. Russell felt Audrey move behind him as he led Leo toward the edge, maintaining a safe distance. Patricia positioned herself to the right, blocking the return path. Russell felt the subtle shift in the air, the moment predators prepare to strike. "Look at that eagle, Leo," Russell said clearly. In one smooth motion, Leo dropped to the ground and rolled under a nearby bush as Russell had instructed. Simultaneously, Russell felt hands slam into his back. Audrey's hands, with shocking force. As he pitched forward, Howard lunged to shove Leo. But Leo wasn't there. Russell allowed himself to fall, controlling his descent just enough to catch a jutting root 15 feet down. The impact nearly dislocated his shoulder, but he held firm, hearing gasps from above. "Leo's gone." Patricia's panicked voice. "Find him," Howard hissed. "He must have fallen." Russell heard, scrambling above as he dangled precariously. Using techniques from his military days, he swung himself onto a narrow ledge, pain shooting through his body. From his position, he could see Leo hiding exactly where they had practiced that morning. Above, the conversation grew heated. "We need to find the boy," Howard insisted. "He's down there somewhere," Audrey said. "We need to leave now before someone comes." "What if he's alive? He saw everything." Patricia's voice trembled. "Then we finish it," came Brady's voice, shocking Russell. He had been hiding nearby all along. "I'll check the bottom. You three head back and establish your alibi at the ranger station." Russell pressed himself against the cliff face as loose rocks tumbled past him. When he heard the 4 sets of footsteps retreating, he carefully began working his way down using handholds he'd noted during their ascent. His body screamed in protest. He'd sustained several injuries in the fall, but adrenaline carried him through. Upon reaching solid ground, Russell moved swiftly to the designated meeting point he'd established with Leo. His son was already there, eyes wide with fear but dry. "Dad, you're hurt," Leo whispered. "I'm okay, buddy. You did perfectly." Russell embraced his son tightly. "Now I need to be very quiet. That man, Brady, is coming to look for us. We need to pretend to be really hurt, okay?" Leo nodded solemnly. They carefully positioned themselves among the rocks, Russell applying fake blood from his emergency kit to make their injuries look convincing. 20 minutes later, they heard footsteps approaching. Brady Nolan, tall, athletic with sharp features, picked his way through the rocks, scanning the area. When he spotted them, a cruel smile spread across his face. "Well," he murmured, drawing closer. "Not quite dead yet." Russell lay motionless, eyes barely open, watching Brady approach. The man drew a knife from his belt. "This wasn't the plan," Brady said conversationally, "but it works just as well. A tragic fall, followed by fatal injuries. No one will question it." As Brady knelt beside them, Leo whimpered convincingly. "Dad," he whispered. "Dad, don't move yet." Brady leaned closer to hear Leo's words, exactly as Russell had predicted he would. In that instant, Russell exploded into action, driving his fist into Brady's throat. The man stumbled back, gasping, as Russell launched himself forward in a controlled tackle. The fight was brief and brutal. Despite his injuries, Russell's combat training proved decisive. Brady lay unconscious, bound with zip ties from Russell's pack. "What did Mom say, Leo?" Russell asked quietly. "Before she pushed us." "What did you hear?" Leo's eyes filled with tears. "She said to Brady on the phone last night, 'Once they're gone, we'll split Russell's millions and never look back.' And then she laughed, Dad." She laughed. Russell froze in horror, the full weight of the betrayal washing over him. His wife hadn't just attempted to kill him. She'd been willing to murder their child for money. "What do we do now, Dad?" Leo whispered. Russell's eyes hardened. "Now," he said, checking Brady's pulse to ensure he was still alive, "we let them think they succeeded. And then we plan." Chapter 3, Playing Dead. "Stay very still," Russell whispered to Leo as distant voices echoed through the canyon. Park rangers were approaching, responding to the accidental fall report Audrey and her parents had undoubtedly filed. They had moved Brady's unconscious form deeper into the rocks, out of immediate sight. Russell had made a critical decision. For now, The world would believe that he and Leo had died in the fall. Only then could he ensure their safety and plan his revenge. "Remember what I told you?" Russell murmured. "This is like our special spy game." Leo nodded solemnly. Despite his age, he displayed remarkable composure, a trait Russell had never wished his son would need. As the Ranger voices grew closer, Russell and Leo slipped away, using the route Russell had memorized from topographical maps. He'd chosen this meeting point carefully. It connected to an old maintenance trail that would allow them to exit the park undetected. The journey was grueling. Russell's body ached from the impact of the fall, and Leo was exhausted. But by nightfall, they reached the emergency rendezvous point where Russell had stashed supplies and a prepaid phone 3 days earlier. "Who are you calling, Dad?" Leo asked as they huddled in an abandoned ranger cabin. "The only person I can trust," Russell replied, dialing a number from memory. Mitchell Hayes answered on the second ring. They had served together in special operations, saved each other's lives multiple times. After leaving the service, Mitchell had established a private security company in Arizona, maintaining ties with their former unit. Russell explained the situation in clipped, coded phrases. Mitchell understood immediately. "Stay put. I'll be there in 4 hours," he said before disconnecting. True to his word, Mitchell arrived at 2 a.m. in an unmarked SUV. His weathered face showed no shock at Russell's appearance, only cold fury at what had happened. "The news is reporting it already," Mitchell informed them. "Tragic hiking accident. Missing, presumed dead. Search suspended until morning due to dangerous conditions." Russell nodded grimly. "And the Blackwells? Playing the devastated family to perfection. Your wife gave a tearful interview about losing her whole world in one tragic accident." Leo, half asleep against Russell's side, stirred. "Mom's pretending to be sad." Mitchell looked at the boy with gentle eyes. "That's right, little man. But we know the truth." 3 days later, from the safety of Mitchell's remote property outside Flagstaff, Russell watched the news coverage of his and Leo's memorial service. Audrey, dressed in elegant black, leaned on Brady Nolan's arm for support. Howard and Patricia Blackwell stood nearby, the picture of grieving grandparents. The investigation had ruled the deaths a tragic accident. Brady, having regained consciousness and escaped from the mountain, had seamlessly inserted himself into the narrative as a family friend providing support during this difficult time. "They didn't even find bodies," Russell muttered, watching the ceremony. "That's what money buys," Mitchell replied. "Your in-laws' influence fast-tracked the declaration of death. And look," he pointed to the screen where a news ticker announced that Audrey Montgomery had been named CEO of Sentinel Security Solutions following the tragic death of its founder. "They're not wasting any time," Russell said, his voice dangerously quiet. That night, after Leo had fallen asleep, Russell outlined his situation to Mitchell and 2 other former teammates who had arrived at the safe house: Diego Rivera, a former intelligence specialist, and Vince Calloway, their unit's one-time logistics expert. "They tried to kill my son for money," Russell concluded, his voice steady but cold. "I won't just disappear and let them enjoy the spoils." "What do you need from us?" Diego asked simply. "Resources, intelligence, and time to heal and plan." Mitchell nodded. "You've got it all, brother." Over the following weeks, as his body recovered, Russell began crafting his revenge. Diego's intelligence gathering revealed that Brady had been systematically accessing Sentinel's client lists and proprietary technology for months, likely planning to strip the company of its innovations before eventually dismantling it. Audrey had already begun liquidating assets and transferring funds. The Blackwells were orchestrating a merger that would effectively give them control of the company Russell had built from nothing. Most disturbing was how quickly Audrey had moved on. 6 weeks after the tragedy, she and Brady were openly together, their relationship no longer hidden. "Dad, when can we go home?" Leo asked one evening as Russell tucked him in. Russell sat on the edge of the bed. "This is our home for now, buddy. We can't go back to our old house. Because Mom and those people might hurt us again?" "Yes," Russell answered honestly. "But I promise you this. They will never hurt you again. I'm going to make sure of that." Leo stared at him with eyes too old for his young face. Are you going to hurt them, Dad? Russell considered how to answer, then decided on the truth. Yes, Leo. Not physically, but I'm going to take back everything they stole from us. And they're going to face justice for what they tried to do. Leo was quiet for a long moment. Good, he finally said. They deserve it. The simple statement, delivered with a child's certainty, cemented Russell's resolve. He wasn't seeking revenge merely for himself, but for the innocence these people had stolen from his son. 3 months after their deaths, Russell was ready to begin. With new identities created by Vince, advanced surveillance technology from Diego, and Mitchell's unflagging support, they had everything they needed. Remember, Russell told his team as they reviewed the final plan, we do this my way. Legal consequences for their crimes when possible. Total destruction of their reputations, finances, and freedom when it's not. But Leo never learns the uglier details. The men nodded in solemn agreement. Russell knelt before his son. I have to go away for a little while, Leo. Uncle Mitchell will take care of you. Leo's eyes filled with tears. Are you coming back? Always, Russell promised. And when I do, we'll start our new life. Just you and me. As Russell prepared to leave, Mitchell handed him a secure phone. We're with you every step of the way. Justice for the Montgomery boys. Russell nodded, his eyes cold with purpose. Not justice, he corrected. Reckoning. Chapter 4. The Ghost in the Machine. Russell adjusted his appearance one final time. Dark hair, now silver gray at the temples, colored contacts changing his hazel eyes to blue, subtle facial prosthetics altering his cheekbones and jawline. The man in the mirror was Alexander Reed, international security consultant and potential investor. 6 months had passed since the cliff. 6 months of recovery, planning, and preparation. Now, Russell was ready to insert himself directly into his enemies' lives. Identity package is solid, Diego confirmed, handing over the final credentials. Background will withstand any standard check. The digital footprint goes back 15 years. Russell nodded. And the system access? Already in place, Diego replied. The backdoor you built into Sentinel security architecture is still there. Brady and Audrey never found it. The irony wasn't lost on Russell. The security system he designed to be impenetrable had a single vulnerability, one that only he knew about. It would now become his primary weapon. Russell's first target wasn't Audrey or Brady, but Howard Blackwell. The patriarch had orchestrated much of what happened, using his influence to expedite the death certificates and helping to transfer Russell's assets to Audrey with remarkable speed. From his hotel suite in downtown Seattle, Russell accessed Sentinel's client database using the hidden backdoor. Howard's company, Blackwell Development, had recently hired Sentinel to secure 3 major luxury condominium projects, contracts that Brady had undoubtedly arranged. Russell smiled coldly as he activated a subroutine in the security system's code. Nothing dramatic, just a subtle degradation of functionality that would trigger false alarms and system failures over the coming weeks. The next morning, Alexander Reed had a breakfast meeting with the vice president of Pacific Northwest Trust Bank, the primary financier of Blackwell's developments. The security concerns are troubling, Russell remarked casually over coffee. 3 system failures in 2 weeks at the lakefront property alone. The VP frowned. I wasn't aware of any security issues. No, it's been the talk of the industry. Russell passed over a tablet showing security incident reports, genuine Sentinel documents that he had accessed and modified. When systems from a company like Sentinel fail this consistently, it raises questions. By the end of the meeting, the VP was visibly concerned, promising to look into the matter personally. Similar conversations with insurance underwriters, potential tenants, and city inspectors followed over the next 2 weeks. Each interaction planted seeds of doubt about both Blackwell Development's projects and Sentinel's reliability. Meanwhile, Russell established himself as a legitimate presence in Seattle's business community. Alexander Reed attended charity functions, joined the right clubs, and gradually worked his way toward an introduction to Brady Nolan, now Sentinel's chief technology officer. The meeting finally occurred at a technology conference where Brady was a featured speaker. Russell listened to the man who had tried to kill him talk about innovations that Russell himself had developed. Fascinating presentation, Russell commented, approaching Brady afterward. Though the quantum encryption protocol you described seems vulnerable to side-channel attacks. Brady's expression flickered between annoyance and uncertainty. That's not been our experience in field testing. Perhaps I misunderstood. Alexander Reed. Russell extended his hand, forcing Brady to shake it. I represent a consortium looking to invest in next-generation security tech. Brady's eyes lit up with greedy interest. Investment, you say? How substantial are we talking? Potentially 9 figures for the right company. Russell smiled. Would you have time for dinner this week to discuss it? The hook was set. Brady eagerly arranged a dinner meeting, clearly not recognizing the man whose life he had tried to take. That evening, Russell video called Leo, now living comfortably at Mitchell's mountain property. How's my boy doing? Russell asked, his heart warming at the sight of his son. Good. Uncle Mitchell's teaching me chess, and I started first grade at the homeschool program. Leo leaned closer to the screen. Did you see the bad people today? Russell nodded. I did, buddy. They didn't recognize me. When are you coming back? Soon, I promise. I miss you every minute. After saying goodnight to Leo, Russell opened his laptop to check on his other ongoing operations. The systematic destruction of Howard Blackwell's business reputation was proceeding perfectly. Construction delays had multiplied after building inspectors, tipped off by concerned sources, had found multiple code violations. The Pacific Northwest Trust Bank had put a hold on further financing pending a complete security review. Equally satisfying were the signs of strain between Howard and Brady. Surveillance showed increasingly heated arguments about Sentinel's failing systems at the Blackwell properties. As Russell prepared for bed, his secure phone chimed with a message from Diego, package delivered to Patricia Blackwell. Timing is scheduled. Russell smiled grimly. Patricia, the cold, calculating woman who had stood by while her daughter attempted to murder her grandson, was about to receive the first direct blow. The next day, as Russell sat down to dinner with Brady at one of Seattle's most exclusive restaurants, Patricia Blackwell was opening a package containing what appeared to be confidential medical reports accidentally sent to her. The documents, masterfully forged by Vince, detailed Howard's apparent diagnosis of early-onset dementia and his consultation with a specialized attorney about sheltering assets before his condition became publicly known. Patricia, ever protective of her social standing and wealth, would undoubtedly confront Howard, who would have no idea what she was talking about. The seeds of distrust would be planted in their marriage just as they were being planted in their business. So, Mr. Reed, Brady said, swirling expensive wine in his glass. Tell me more about this investment opportunity. Russell leaned forward. My clients are particularly interested in biometric security applications. I understand Sentinel has proprietary technology in that area. Brady couldn't hide his eagerness. Absolutely. In fact, I personally developed our latest facial recognition algorithm. The blatant lie. Russell had developed that technology, confirmed what Russell already knew. Brady was a fraud, taking credit for others' innovations. Impressive, Russell replied smoothly. My consortium would be interested in an exclusive demonstration, something beyond what the general market has seen. Brady took the bait. I might be able to arrange a private showing of technology still in development. Excellent. Will next week work? And perhaps your partner could join us? I understand Audrey Montgomery is quite the force in the company now. Brady's smile faltered slightly. How do you know about Audrey's role? Russell maintained his pleasant expression. Due diligence, Mr. Nolan. We researched thoroughly before investing hundreds of millions. Brady relaxed. Of course. I'll make sure Audrey is available. As dinner concluded, Russell reflected on how easily Brady had fallen into his trap. Soon, the man would be offering to share Sentinel's most closely guarded secrets, intellectual property worth billions, with a potential investor whose identity was entirely fabricated. More importantly, Russell would soon come face-to-face with Audrey, the woman who had tried to kill their child for money, the woman whose betrayal had been complete and absolute. Back in his hotel suite, Russell received another update from Diego, Howard and Patricia Blackwell were having a massive argument, with Patricia accusing Howard of hiding his condition and making secret plans to protect his money. Russell allowed himself a moment of cold satisfaction. The foundations were cracking. Soon, they would crumble entirely. But first, he needed to call Leo and wish him good night. Amid all the careful planning and calculated vengeance, that nightly call remained his anchor to humanity, the reminder of why this reckoning was necessary. "Good night, buddy," Russell said softly. "Remember, no matter what happens, you and I are a team." "The best team," Leo agreed sleepily. "Night, Dad. Get the bad guys." "I will," Russell promised. "That's a guarantee." Chapter 5. Webs of Deception. The penthouse conference room of Sentinel Security Solutions offered a panoramic view of Seattle's skyline. Russell, as Alexander Reed, sat across from Brady and Audrey, maintaining his pleasant investor persona while inwardly noting every detail of his wife's appearance. Audrey looked both the same and different. Her blonde hair was now cut in a sleek bob, her wardrobe more aggressively corporate. But the most significant change was in her eyes, harder, more calculating than Russell remembered. Had she always been this person, or had the act of attempted murder transformed her? "Our biometric recognition systems are industry-leading," Brady was saying, projecting confidence he didn't deserve. "The proprietary algorithms adapt to aging, subtle disguises, even certain types of cosmetic surgery." Russell allowed himself a small smile at the irony. The system Brady was boasting about had failed to recognize its creator, sitting right across the table. "Impressive claims," Russell replied, "though I understand there have been some reliability issues with Sentinel's systems recently." Audrey's smile tightened. "Isolated incidents, Mr. Reed. All technology experiences occasional glitches." "Of course," Russell conceded. "My consortium is primarily interested in the military and government applications. Those contracts are where the real value lies. Wouldn't you agree?" Both Brady and Audrey leaned forward slightly, the subtle telepredators sensing prey. "Sentinel has several government contracts," Brady confirmed eagerly. "Though we're always looking to expand that portfolio," Audrey added. Russell nodded thoughtfully. "My clients have connections in the defense sector that could prove valuable to both parties. However, before moving forward, they need to understand Sentinel's ownership structure. I understand there was a recent transition." A shadow passed over Audrey's face. "My husband and son died in a tragic accident earlier this year. As Russell's wife and next of kin, ownership transferred to me." Not a flicker of genuine grief showed in her expression as she spoke about the tragic accident she had orchestrated. "I'm sorry for your loss," Russell said, the words bitter in his mouth. "Thank you," Audrey replied automatically. Fortunately, Brady has been both a personal support and a tremendous asset to the company during this difficult transition. Brady placed his hand over Audrey's in a practiced display of affection. "We've managed to maintain Sentinel's market position while implementing several innovations that Russell, Audrey's late husband, had been reluctant to pursue." Russell maintained his neutral expression, though inwardly he seethed at Brady's casual disparagement. "Such as expanding into consumer data mining," Brady explained. "There's immense value in the information our security systems can collect about household habits, purchasing patterns, daily routines." "Privacy concerns don't trouble you?" Russell asked mildly. Brady waved dismissively. "Our end-user agreements cover us legally. Most consumers never read the fine print." The meeting continued for another hour, with Brady and Audrey revealing increasingly unethical plans for Sentinel's technology, selling personal data, creating backdoors for government surveillance, and monetizing security vulnerabilities instead of patching them. Everything they outlined contradicted the ethical principles upon which Russell had built the company. But their eagerness to impress a potential investor made them careless with information that would soon destroy them. As the meeting concluded, Russell expressed interest in a more detailed presentation the following week. "And perhaps your in-laws could join us? I understand the Blackwells have significant influence in regional development. Synergies there could be valuable." Audrey and Brady exchanged a quick glance. "My parents are dealing with some personal matters at the moment," Audrey said carefully. Nothing serious, I hope? Russell inquired with practiced concern. Just business complications. And my father hasn't been feeling well. Russell nodded sympathetically. Of course. Another time, perhaps. After leaving Sentinel's offices, Russell contacted Diego. Update on the Blackwells? Their marriage is imploding, Diego confirmed. Patricia moved into their lake house yesterday, after consulting with a divorce attorney. Howard's busy trying to figure out why 3 of his development projects are suddenly facing regulatory issues and financing problems. And our banking maneuver? In progress. Vince's contact at the SEC has flagged the unusual transfer patterns from Sentinel's accounts. Preliminary audit scheduled for next month. Russell's next stop was the office of Thomas Willis, an investigative reporter known for exposing corporate malfeasance. As Alexander Reed, Russell had spent weeks cultivating Willis as a contact, positioning himself as a whistleblower concerned about unethical practices in the security industry. These came into my possession, Russell said, sliding a flash drive across the desk to Willis. Audio recordings of Sentinel executives discussing plans to sell private consumer data to third parties without adequate disclosure. Willis's eyes widened as he listened to excerpts, actual recordings Russell had made during his meeting with Brady and Audrey. This is explosive, Willis said, especially given Sentinel's government contracts. There's strict regulations about data handling. I thought you should know, Russell replied modestly. The public deserves to understand how their privacy is being compromised. Later that evening, Russell met with his final contact of the day, Special Agent Lore Morris of the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division. Your information on Blackwell development was accurate, Morris confirmed in a private room at an upscale restaurant. We found evidence of multiple code violations being covered up through bribes to inspectors. The investigation is expanding. What about the connection to Sentinel? Russell asked. We're looking into it. The timing of these security system failures seems suspiciously convenient for certain competitors. Russell nodded. I may have additional information that could help your investigation, he offered, producing documents showing irregular financial transfers between Blackwell Development and offshore accounts linked to Brady Nolan, transactions Diego had carefully documented. As Russell returned to his hotel, he received a video call from Mitchell. Leo appeared on screen, grinning widely to show a missing front tooth. Dad, look what happened today. Russell's carefully constructed veneer of Alexander Reed fell away instantly. Wow, buddy, did the tooth fairy visit? Uncle Mitchell says she's coming tonight. I'm going to stay up and try to see her. Russell laughed, a genuine sound that had become rare these past months. Good luck with that, Leo. I miss you. Miss you too. Are you coming home soon? Very soon, Russell promised. Just a little more work to do. After saying goodnight, Russell reviewed the progress of his plan. Howard Blackwell's business was crumbling under regulatory scrutiny and financial pressure. Patricia was filing for divorce, convinced her husband was hiding assets and mental decline. Brady and Audrey had unknowingly provided damning evidence of their unethical business practices to both the media and federal investigators. Most importantly, they were beginning to turn on each other. Howard blamed Brady for the failing security systems. Patricia suspected both Howard and Audrey of financial deception. Brady and Audrey were growing frustrated with the Blackwells' personal problems interfering with business. Russell opened his laptop and activated the final phase of his cyber strategy, a carefully constructed series of digital breadcrumbs suggesting that Brady had been systematically embezzling from Sentinel while deliberately sabotaging the company's security systems to distract from the theft. The evidence would initially appear only as subtle anomalies in the company's financial reporting, just enough to trigger concerns from the board members Diego had quietly contacted. But once investigators started looking, the trail would lead directly to Brady. Russell's phone chimed with a message from Vince. Package 2 delivered to Patricia Blackwell. The second accidental delivery, banking statements showing Howard had recently opened accounts in the Caymans and transferred significant assets there, would accelerate the collapse of their marriage. Russell allowed himself a grim smile as he prepared for bed. The web was tightening around all of them. Soon, it would be time for the final confrontation, but not before each of them had been systematically stripped of everything they valued. As he drifted towards sleep, Russell pictured Leo's smiling face. The pain of Audrey's betrayal would never fully heal, especially for their son. But Russell would ensure that those responsible paid the full price for what they had done. Tomorrow would bring him one step closer to that reckoning. Chapter 6: Fault Lines. 9 days later, Russell watched from his hotel room as Thomas Willis's investigative report dominated the morning news cycle. Security giant Sentinel accused of massive privacy violations and data selling scheme. The story detailed how the company had allegedly created backdoors in its security systems to harvest private data from homes and businesses, selling that information to marketing firms and data brokers without customer knowledge or consent. Sentinel stock had plummeted 28% in pre-market trading. The company's PR team was in full crisis mode, issuing denials that rang hollow against the damning audio evidence Willis had published. Russell's phone rang, Diego with a morning update. FBI just arrived at Sentinel headquarters with search warrants, Diego reported. And you'll love this. Brady tried to access those Cayman accounts last night to move funds, but found them frozen. Audrey, calling every board member, trying to distance herself from the privacy scandal, blaming it all on Brady's unauthorized initiatives that she just learned about. Russell nodded, unsurprised by Audrey's betrayal of her partner. And the Blackwells? Patricia filed for divorce yesterday, demanding an emergency freeze on all joint assets. Howard had a very public meltdown at his country club, accusing multiple members of conspiring against him. Security escorted him out. Everything was proceeding according to plan, perhaps even better than expected. The carefully constructed lives of those who had tried to kill him and Leo were disintegrating rapidly, with minimal direct action from Russell himself. He had simply created the conditions for their own worst impulses to flourish. "What's your next move?" Diego asked. "Time for Alexander Reed to express his concerns about investing in a company under federal investigation," Russell replied. "I have a meeting with Audrey in 2 hours." Sentinel's headquarters buzzed with barely contained chaos when Russell arrived. Employees huddled in worried groups, while FBI agents methodically collected evidence from executive offices. Audrey's assistant, looking harried, escorted Russell past a conference room where Brady was being interviewed by federal agents. "Ms. Montgomery apologizes for the disruption," the assistant said. "As you can see, we're dealing with some unexpected issues today." Audrey waited in her office, formerly Russell's office, looking remarkably composed given the circumstances. Only the tightness around her eyes betrayed her stress. "Mr. Reed," she greeted him with forced warmth. "Thank you for coming despite this morning's misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding seems a mild term for federal agents with search warrants," Russell observed, taking a seat across from her. Audrey's smile didn't reach her eyes. "A competitor's smear campaign, nothing more." Brady made some unfortunate statements that were taken out of context, but there's no substance to these allegations. "The recordings sound quite substantive," Russell countered mildly. "Edited and manipulated." Audrey dismissed with a wave of her hand. "We'll weather this storm. Sentinel's foundations are strong." The irony of her statement wasn't lost on Russell. The foundation she stood upon, his company, his innovation, his life's work, had been stolen through attempted murder. "I hope you're right," Russell said. "However, my consortium must delay any investment decisions until these legal matters are resolved. I'm sure you understand." Frustration flashed across Audrey's face before she masked it. "Of course, though this could present an opportunity for a visionary investor. Our stock is temporarily undervalued. Perhaps. There's another matter I wanted to discuss, a personal one, if you don't mind." Audrey raised an eyebrow. "Personal? I understand you lost your husband and son recently. Tragic circumstances." Something flickered in Audrey's eyes. Not grief, but wariness. "Yes, a hiking accident. Strange coincidence." Russell continued conversationally. "I was hiking in that same area around that time. Beautiful but treacherous terrain." "Mr. Reed, I don't see how this is relevant to." "Tell me," Russell interrupted, his tone still pleasant, but with an underlying edge. When you planned to kill your husband and child, did you consider alternative methods? The cliff seems so uncertain. Audrey froze, color draining from her face. I don't know what you're talking about. My family died in a tragic accident. Russell leaned forward slightly. Did they? No bodies were ever recovered, as I understand it. Who are you? Audrey whispered, her hand moving toward her desk drawer. I wouldn't, Russell advised quietly. The gun in that drawer has been disabled. Audrey's hand stopped. Security, she called out sharply. They're rather busy with the FBI at the moment, Russell informed her. And your office security cameras are on a loop, a feature of the system I designed. Recognition dawned in Audrey's eyes as Russell removed his colored contacts, revealing his natural hazel eyes. No, she breathed. It's not possible. Many things seem impossible until they happen, Russell replied, his voice now dropping its affected accent. Like a mother trying to murder her child for money. Audrey's shock quickly hardened in a calculation. You can't prove anything. It was an accident. Your word against mine. That might have been true 6 months ago, Russell acknowledged. But now, your parents' marriage is destroyed. Brady is about to be indicted for fraud and embezzlement. Your company is under federal investigation. And most importantly, he produced a small recorder. You just tacitly admitted to knowing I'm your supposedly dead husband. Audrey's mask of composure shattered. What do you want? Money? The company back. I want you to understand something, Audrey, Russell said, his voice deadly quiet. Everything happening to you, to Brady, to your parents, this is just the beginning. By the time I'm finished, you'll have nothing. No freedom, no reputation, no future. Just like you planned for me and our son. Leo, Audrey whispered. He's alive too? The son you were willing to murder? Yes, he's alive and well. And he knows exactly what you try to do to him. Tears filled Audrey's eyes. Whether from genuine emotion or calculated manipulation, Russell couldn't tell and didn't care. Russell, please. It was Brady's idea. He manipulated me, convinced me. Save it. Russell cut her off coldly. I heard you laugh about our deaths on the phone. Leo heard you. There's no coming back from that. A knock at the door interrupted them. Audrey quickly composed herself as her assistant poked her head in. Ms. Montgomery, the FBI agents would like to speak with you now. Tell them I'll be right there. Audrey replied with remarkable steadiness. When the assistant withdrew, Audrey fixed Russell with a calculating stare. This isn't over. Oh, I agree. Russell rose to leave. It's far from over. But understand this. I'm not just going to destroy what you have. I'm going to make you destroy each other. As Russell walked out of Sentinel's headquarters, he knew Audrey would immediately warn Brady and her parents. They would scramble to form a united front against this new threat. But it was too late. The seeds of distrust had already been planted too deeply. Each of them would now suspect the others of being willing to cut deals and shift blame. Their alliance of convenience would fracture under pressure. Russell's phone buzzed with a text from Mitchell. Leo's school project won first prize. He wants to tell you himself tonight. A genuine smile crossed Russell's face. Amid all the calculated vengeance, this reminder of his son's continuing life and achievements grounded him. Everything he was doing, the destruction of those who had betrayed them, was to secure Leo's future and ensure justice for the innocents they had tried to steal. That evening, as Russell packed his hotel room in preparation for the next phase of his plan, breaking news flashed across the television. Sentinel Security CEO Audrey Montgomery arrested on conspiracy charges. The reporter detailed how federal investigators had discovered evidence linking Audrey to Brady Nolan's alleged embezzlement scheme. Even more damaging, anonymous sources had provided information suggesting the company had been selling security vulnerabilities to hackers targeting specific high-value clients. Russell hadn't planned for Audrey's arrest quite this soon, but he wasn't surprised. Once federal investigators started digging, they would find a trail of evidence Diego had carefully constructed, all pointing to very real crimes that Audrey and Brady had committed in their greed to control Sentinel. His secure phone rang, Vince with an urgent update. Howard Blackwell just tried to flee the country, Vince reported. Customs stopped him at Seattle-Tacoma Airport with over $2 million in bearer bonds in his luggage. He's being detained for questioning. And Patricia? filing amended divorce papers tomorrow citing new evidence of criminal conspiracy. She's trying to distance herself completely. Russell nodded, satisfaction coursing through him. They're turning on each other even faster than expected. There's more, Vince continued. Brady's lawyer reached out to the FBI about a potential deal. He's offering information on, quote, a conspiracy to commit murder in exchange for leniency on the financial crimes. So Brady was attempting to save himself by revealing the Cliff incident. It was a predictable move, but ultimately futile. Without bodies or physical evidence, it would be his word against circumstantial evidence. More importantly, the attempted murder would now become part of the official record, ensuring that Audrey, Brady, and the Blackwells would be investigated for the crime, even if conclusive proof remained elusive. Perfect, Russell said. Let them tear each other apart. Later that night, Russell video called Leo as promised. Dad, my volcano won first prize. The judges said the chemical reaction was the best in the whole school. Russell beamed with pride. That's amazing, buddy. I knew you could do it. Uncle Mitchell helped with the wiring for the lights, but I did all the chemistry myself. I can't wait to see it in person. And guess what? I'm coming home tomorrow. Leo's eyes widened. Really? Are you done with your mission? Almost, Russell replied. The bad people are facing justice now. But there's one more thing I need to do, and then we can start our new life. Promise? I promise, Leo. Nothing will ever separate us again. After saying goodnight, Russell made one final call to the Seattle District Attorney's office. Using a voice modulator, he provided an anonymous tip about potential evidence regarding Russell and Leo Montgomery's accidental deaths, evidence that could be found in Brady Nolan's private storage facility. The storage unit, rented by Diego under Brady's name months earlier, contained damning items. Detailed maps of the Cliff area with the accident spot marked, life insurance documents for Russell and Leo with Audrey as beneficiary, and a burner phone with text messages discussing the plan. None of it would stand up to intense forensic scrutiny, but it didn't need to. It only needed to create enough suspicion to ensure that the attempted murder wouldn't be forgotten amid the financial crimes investigation. Russell looked out at the Seattle skyline one last time. Tomorrow, he would leave this identity behind and return to Leo. The machinery of justice, both legal and personal, was now fully in motion. As he turned away from the window, Russell's expression hardened with cold resolve. The final act of his reckoning was about to begin. Chapter 7. House of Cards. The King County Detention Center's visiting room was sterile and impersonal. White walls, bolted-down furniture, and omnipresent surveillance cameras. Brady Nolan, dressed in an orange jumpsuit, looked nothing like the confident executive who had tried to steal Russell's life and company. His face was haggard, his eyes haunted. Russell, now using the identity of Michael Kincaid, attorney, sat across from him, legal pad in hand. I don't understand, Brady said, frowning. I requested a meeting with the district attorney, not another lawyer. The DA sent me to evaluate your claim about the Montgomery deaths before committing to a formal meeting, Russell explained smoothly. I need to assess whether your information has any actual value. Brady leaned forward eagerly. It does. Audrey Montgomery planned the whole thing. She wanted her husband and kid dead to get control of Sentinel and the insurance money. Her parents helped set it up. And your role in this alleged murder attempt? Russell asked, his voice professionally detached despite the rage simmering beneath. I was manipulated, Brady insisted, the lie coming easily. Audrey told me she was in an abusive relationship, that she feared for her life. I was trying to help her escape a dangerous situation. Russell made notes, his face betraying nothing. And you have evidence of this conspiracy? Some of it was in my storage unit, but the police have that now. Look, I can testify against Audrey and her parents. They're the masterminds. I just went along because I believed Audrey was in danger. Interesting perspective, Russell commented. Though it contradicts Ms. Montgomery's statement that you orchestrated the entire plan to gain control of Sentinel's proprietary technology. Brady's face flushed with anger. She's lying. That bitch is trying to pin everything on me. What about Howard and Patricia Blackwell? They claim you approached them with a murder plan, promising them a share of Sentinel in exchange for their help. That's bullshit. Brady slammed his hand on the table, drawing a warning look from the guard. Lowering his voice, he continued, "The Blackwells hated Russell from day one. They were pushing for his elimination long before I came into the picture." Russell nodded thoughtfully. "So everyone is lying except you?" "Yes. I mean," Brady ran his hands through his unkempt hair. "I made mistakes, but I'm not a murderer. I deserve a deal." "Perhaps," Russell allowed. "But there's one problem with your account." "What's that?" Russell leaned closer, his voice dropping. "The cliff." Brady blinked in confusion. "What about it? If you were merely helping an abused woman escape, why choose a method that looked like an accident? Why not go to the police? Why involve a 6-year-old child?" Brady shifted uncomfortably. "That wasn't my idea. Audrey insisted the kid had to go too, or Russell's money would be tied up in trusts for years." The casual way Brady discussed Leo's intended murder sent a wave of cold fury through Russell. He maintained his professional demeanor with supreme effort. "I see. One last question, Mr. Nolan. Do you ever wonder if Russell and Leo Montgomery might have survived the fall?" Brady scoffed. "Impossible. 200 feet onto jagged rocks. No way they survived. Yet no bodies were ever recovered. The area is full of deep crevices. Animals. The elements." Brady dismissed the notion with a wave. "They're dead. Trust me." Russell gathered his notes and rose. "Thank you for your candor, Mr. Nolan. I'll convey your desire for a deal to the district attorney." "Wait, when will I hear back?" "My arraignment is tomorrow." "Justice moves at its own pace, Mr. Nolan," Russell replied, a cold smile touching his lips. "But I suspect your future will be decided quite soon." As Russell left the detention center, he made 3 calls, digitally altered recordings of his conversation with Brady, sent to Audrey's attorney, Howard Blackwell's attorney, and Patricia Blackwell's home number. By nightfall, all 3 parties would know that Brady was attempting to save himself by portraying them as the primary conspirators in a murder plot. Their fragile alliance would shatter completely. Russell's next stop was the offices of Thomas Willis, the investigative reporter who had broken the Sentinel privacy scandal. "I have something that might interest you," Russell told the journalist, sliding a flash drive across the desk. Audio recordings of Brady Nolan discussing his role in the disappearance of Russell and Leo Montgomery. Willis's eyes widened. "The CEO who died in that hiking accident months ago? Are you suggesting it wasn't an accident?" "I'm not suggesting anything," Russell replied carefully. "I'm merely providing information that the public deserves to know. You'll find corroborating evidence on that drive as well. Financial transactions, communications, witness statements." "This is explosive," Willis murmured, already scanning the files. "If this checks out, we're talking about a corporate coup executed through murder." "Attempted murder," Russell corrected quietly. "Review the medical examiner's reports carefully. You'll notice they declared death without recovering bodies." Willis looked up sharply. "Are you saying Montgomery and his son might be alive?" Russell merely smiled. "I'm saying the truth deserves to come to light. All of it." That evening, from the safety of Mitchell's mountain property, Russell watched the dominoes continue to fall. Breaking news alerts reported that Howard Blackwell had been charged with multiple counts of bribery and fraud related to his development projects. Patricia Blackwell had announced through her attorney that she was cooperating with authorities in exchange for immunity. Most satisfyingly, Audrey's attorney had withdrawn from her case, citing irreconcilable differences regarding defense strategy, a clear indication that Audrey had likely admitted guilt to her lawyer while attempting to shift blame. Leo bounded into the room, interrupting Russell's thoughts. "Dad, Uncle Diego brought a puppy. Can we keep him?" Russell laughed, the sound genuine and warm. "A puppy, huh? Let me see this creature." He followed Leo outside, where Diego waited with a small German shepherd mix who immediately ran to Leo. "Found him at a rescue," Diego explained. "Thought the little man could use a friend." Russell watched his son rolling in the grass with the puppy, his heart full. Tomorrow would bring the final phase of his plan, a direct confrontation that would complete the destruction of those who had tried to take this away from him. But tonight was for his son, for remembering why he had fought so hard to survive and return. What are you going to name him? Russell asked, kneeling beside Leo. Leo looked thoughtful, then broke into a grin. Phoenix, because he got a second chance, just like us. Russell hugged his son tightly. Phoenix it is. A perfect name. Later, after Leo had gone to bed, Russell reviewed the final elements of his plan with his team. The press conference is set for 10 a.m., Mitchell confirmed. All major networks will cover it. Sentinel's board is meeting at 9 a.m. to discuss the company's future, Diego added. With Brady and Audrey both in custody and the stock in freefall, they're desperate for stability. Vince handed Russell a secure phone. Your call to the board is scheduled for 9:15. Everything else is in place. Russell nodded. Good. After tomorrow, we can all move on with our lives. Are you sure about this approach? Mitchell asked quietly. It's more public than we discussed initially. I'm sure, Russell replied firmly. This isn't just about personal revenge anymore. It's about justice for Leo, for myself, and for everyone they were willing to hurt in their greed. As his friends departed to finalize preparations, Russell checked on Leo one last time. His son slept peacefully, the puppy curled against his side. The sight strengthened Russell's resolve. Tomorrow would bring the final reckoning, not through violence or illegal means, but through the complete and irrevocable exposure of truth. A truth that would destroy his enemies more thoroughly than any physical vengeance could achieve. Russell returned to his study and opened a secured laptop. On the screen was a simple document, his sworn testimony about the events at the cliff, supported by evidence his team had gathered over the past months. He added one final sentence, then closed the file. Justice was coming, and it would be absolute. Chapter 8. Resurrection Day. The Sentinel Security Solutions boardroom hummed with tense conversation. 9 board members, wealthy investors and industry veterans, debated the company's uncertain future in light of the cascading scandals. The stock has lost 63% of its value in 10 days, the CFO reported grimly. Major clients are terminating contracts hourly. We're facing a class action lawsuit from customers over the privacy violations. And the criminal investigations? Asked Eleanor Winters, the most senior board member. Expanding daily. Beyond the fraud and embezzlement charges against Nolan and Montgomery, the Seattle DA is now investigating possible murder conspiracy charges related to Russell Montgomery's death. The room fell silent at this last revelation. This company cannot survive much more negative publicity, Eleanor stated flatly. We need to consider all options, including selling core assets and dissolving the corporation. The boardroom phone rang, startling everyone. The CFO glanced at the display. It's the call from MK Ventures that was scheduled. Should I postpone? Eleanor shook her head. Take it. At this point, any potential lifeline is worth exploring. The CFO activated the speakerphone. This is the Sentinel board. We're on a secure line. Good morning. Russell's voice came through clearly, though none present recognized it. I understand Sentinel is facing some challenges. That's putting it mildly, Eleanor replied dryly. Are you still interested in discussing acquisition given recent developments? More than interested, Russell answered. In fact, I'm prepared to make an offer for controlling interest in Sentinel, effective immediately. The board members exchanged glances of surprise and cautious relief. That's unexpected given the company's current situation, the CFO remarked. On the contrary, Russell countered. It's precisely because of the current situation that this opportunity exists. My offer is straightforward. I'll inject $350 million in immediate capital in exchange for 51% ownership. Murmurs of shock rippled through the room. The amount was a fraction of what Sentinel had been worth weeks ago, but significantly more than its current market valuation. This is contingent on immediate board acceptance and 2 non-negotiable conditions, Russell continued. First, all current executives are removed, giving me complete operational control. Second, all proprietary technology and patents are secured in a new holding company under my exclusive management. May I ask why you take such a risk on a company in our position? Eleanor asked cautiously. Because I understand Sentinel's true value better than anyone, Russell replied. As for my identity, I suggest you turn on any news channel. My press conference is about to begin. Confused, the CFO activated the large screen on the boardroom wall, tuning to a national news network. The camera showed a podium set up outside the federal courthouse in Seattle, where a crowd of reporters had gathered. The board watched in stunned silence as Russell Montgomery, presumed dead for months, stepped up to the microphone, very much alive. "Ladies and gentlemen," Russell began, his voice steady. "My name is Russell Montgomery. 8 months ago, my 6-year-old son Leo and I were pushed from a cliff in an attempted murder orchestrated by my wife, Audrey Montgomery, her lover Brady Nolan, and her parents, Howard and Patricia Blackwell." Gasps and shouts erupted from the press corps. "We survived by pretending to be dead," Russell continued calmly. "While recovering from our injuries, I uncovered evidence of their conspiracy, motivated by greed for control of my company, Sentinel Security Solutions, and the millions in life insurance they had taken out without my knowledge." In the Sentinel boardroom, chaos erupted as board members realized they were watching their company's founder, supposedly dead, exposing a conspiracy on national television. "I am alive. My son is alive. And I have returned to reclaim what was stolen from us," Russell stated firmly. "I have provided federal prosecutors with extensive evidence of the conspiracy against us, as well as documentation of the fraud, embezzlement, and privacy violations committed by the conspirators after our supposed deaths." Russell looked directly into the camera. "To the board of Sentinel Security Solutions, I founded this company with a commitment to ethical security solutions. That legacy has been betrayed. You have 15 minutes to accept the offer presented to you moments ago, or I will use my remaining shares and founder's privileges to initiate the dissolution of the company entirely." In the boardroom, the phone remained open on the conference table. Through it came Russell's voice once more. "Your time starts now." The next 14 minutes were a blur of frantic discussion, legal consultations, and ultimately, recognition of the inevitable. With 1 minute remaining, Eleanor Winters spoke into the phone. "The board accepts your offer and conditions, Mr. Montgomery. We will execute the necessary paperwork immediately." "Wise decision," Russell responded. "My attorneys will contact you within the hour." At the press conference, Russell continued addressing the stunned media. "I built Sentinel Security Solutions to protect people. Instead, under new leadership, it was corrupted into a tool for surveillance and data theft. That ends today. I have returned to rebuild this company with its original mission and ethics." A reporter shouted, "Mr. Montgomery, where have you and your son been all these months?" "In a secure location, recovering from our injuries and gathering evidence," Russell replied. "My son has shown remarkable courage throughout this ordeal." "Will you testify against your wife and the others?" another called out. Russell's expression hardened. "Absolutely. Justice requires that those who conspire to commit murder, especially against a child, face the full consequences of their actions. I will not rest until everyone involved is held accountable." Across town, in separate holding cells, Audrey Montgomery and Brady Nolan watched the press conference with expressions of shocked disbelief. Audrey sank to her knees, her carefully constructed world collapsing completely. Not only had her murder plot failed, but her husband, the man she had tried to kill, now controlled everything she had schemed to possess. Brady paced his cell frantically, realizing that his attempt to cut a deal had just become worthless. With Russell alive and presenting evidence directly to prosecutors, there would be no leniency. At their lake house, Patricia Blackwell watched the television in horror, a half-packed suitcase open beside her. Her phone rang. Her attorney, undoubtedly calling to tell her that her immunity deal was now worthless with Russell's public resurrection. Howard Blackwell, in his own detention cell awaiting a bond hearing, simply stared at the television in stunned silence. The press conference continued with Russell answering questions calmly and directly. When asked about his plans for the future, his response was measured but firm. "My first priority has always been my son's well-being. My second is ensuring that those who betrayed us face justice. And my third is rebuilding what was nearly destroyed by greed and betrayal." Back at Mitchell's mountain property, Leo watched his father on television, sitting between Mitchell and Diego. Your dad is pretty amazing, Mitchell told the boy. Leo nodded solemnly. The bad people can't hurt us anymore, right? Never again, Diego assured him. Your dad made sure of that. As the press conference concluded, Russell returned to the secured SUV where his team waited. It's done, he told them. The board accepted. Sentinel is back under our control. And our new identities? Vince asked. Still valuable, Russell replied. We'll maintain them for Leo's sake. A fresh start, away from the media attention. But first, we finish this. The next morning, Russell sat in the district attorney's office, providing formal statements about the attempted murder and subsequent events. With his testimony and the evidence his team had gathered, the DA assured him that charges against all 4 conspirators would be expanded to include attempted murder, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. They'll try to cut deals, the DA warned, especially the Blackwells. Let them try, Russell replied coldly. My son and I will testify to what happened on that cliff, and I have evidence of their conversations planning our deaths. Later that day, Russell returned to Sentinel headquarters for the first time since his death. Employees stared in shock as he walked through the offices, Mitchell and Diego flanking him like bodyguards. In the executive suite, his old office, which Audrey had redecorated, Russell called together the remaining management team. Effective immediately, I am resuming control as CEO, he announced without preamble. The company will undergo complete restructuring. Those who participated in or facilitated the privacy violations and data selling will be terminated. Those who oppose these practices will be rewarded. One brave executive raised her hand. Sir, the company's reputation is salvageable, Russell finished firmly. We will issue full refunds to affected customers, implement transparent privacy practices, and rebuild trust through actions, not words. As the meeting concluded, Russell remained alone in the office that had once been his. He removed Audrey's personal items from the desk, placing them in a box for her attorneys to collect. Among her things, he found a family photograph. Russell, Audrey, and Leo at the lake house the previous summer. They looked happy, normal. The perfect family. It had all been a lie. Russell placed the photograph face down in the box. That chapter of his life was over. Now, he focused only on securing justice and building a new future for himself and Leo. His phone rang. Mitchell. Thought you'd want to know, his friend said without preamble. Brady Nolan is trying to hang himself on Audrey. His new attorney just offered the DA a full confession, including details about how Audrey planned everything months in advance. Let them destroy each other, Russell replied. It saves us the trouble. That evening, as Russell prepared to return to the mountain property and Leo, he received one final call from Eleanor Winters. The board has officially ratified your return as CEO and majority owner, she informed him. And we owe you an apology for not questioning the circumstances of your alleged death more thoroughly. You were misled by expert manipulators, Russell acknowledged. But going forward, I expect better judgment. Understood. There's one more thing. Audrey's attorney has requested a meeting with you. Something about information you might want. Russell considered this. Arrange it for tomorrow morning. But I'll only give her 15 minutes. The next day, in a small conference room of the county jail, Russell came face-to-face with Audrey for the first time since revealing his survival. She looked diminished somehow, her designer clothes replaced by prison garb, her perfect makeup absent, her confident posture now slumped. Russell, she began, her voice quavering. I never thought. Save it, he cut her off coldly. You have 13 minutes remaining. Use them wisely. Audrey's facade cracked entirely. Please, Russell. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. Brady pushed me into it. He threatened me. I was scared and confused. Is that why you laughed about our deaths on the phone? Russell asked, his voice deadly quiet. Because you were scared and confused? Audrey's eyes widened. You heard. Leo heard too. Russell informed her. Your son heard you laugh about killing him. Tears spilled down Audrey's cheeks. I'll tell them everything. I'll testify against Brady, against my parents. They were the masterminds. The prosecutors already have everything they need, Russell replied evenly. But feel free to turn on your co-conspirators. It changes nothing for you. Please, Audrey whispered desperately. For the sake of what we once had. We had nothing. Russell cut her off. Everything was a lie. You never loved me or Leo. You just wanted what I built. That's not true. I loved you once. Before Brady. Russell stood, having heard enough. Your time's up. Goodbye, Audrey. As he turned to leave, she called after him in desperation. What about Leo? He needs his mother. Russell paused at the door, looking back at her with cold contempt. Leo has everything he needs, and he knows exactly what his mother tried to do to him. That's her legacy, Audrey. That's what you'll be remembered for. With that, Russell walked away, never looking back. Chapter 9. Unforgiving Depths. 3 years later, the lakeside home on the outskirts of Portland bore little resemblance to Russell's former Seattle residence. Smaller, more modest, but infinitely warmer. It reflected the priorities of its occupants rather than serving as a status symbol. Russell, now living under the name Richard Miller, watched from the deck as 9-year-old Leo played fetch with Phoenix in the yard. The boy had grown taller, more confident in the 3 years since their resurrection. Therapy had helped him process the trauma of his mother's betrayal, though some wounds would never completely heal. Looking philosophical today, Mitchell observed, joining Russell with coffee mugs for them both. Just appreciative, Russell replied, accepting the coffee. 3 years ago, I wasn't sure we'd make it to this point. Mitchell nodded. Heard from Vince this morning. Audrey's final appeal was denied. She'll serve the full 25 years. Russell showed no reaction to this news. His ex-wife's fate had ceased to matter to him long ago. After their confrontation in the jail, he had focused entirely on rebuilding both Sentinel Security Solutions and his life with Leo. The company had recovered under his leadership, though he had eventually sold his majority stake for billions, preferring to focus on raising his son away from the corporate world. Brady Nolan had received 30 years for his role in the murder plot, embezzlement, and corporate fraud. Howard Blackwell had died of a heart attack while awaiting trial, while Patricia had plea bargained for a reduced sentence of 15 years. And the foundation? Mitchell asked, changing the subject. Russell's expression softened. Funding 30 new child trauma centers across the country this year. Leo's idea, actually. The Phoenix Foundation, named for Leo's dog and the symbolism of their own rebirth, had become Russell's primary focus. Using much of his fortune, the foundation specialized in helping children who had survived trauma and betrayal. Dad, Leo called from below. Uncle Diego's here. Diego's car pulled into the driveway, and soon the 4 of them were seated on the deck, catching up. Diego now ran security for the foundation, while Mitchell managed its operations. The bonds forged during their military service and strengthened during Russell's darkest days had evolved into a chosen family. How's school going, champion? Diego asked Leo. Great. I got the highest score on our science test yesterday, Leo reported proudly. And I'm starting karate next week. Russell smiled at his son's enthusiasm. Despite everything he had experienced, Leo had emerged resilient and compassionate, though with a wariness beyond his years when meeting new people. Later, after Diego and Mitchell had left and Leo was in bed, Russell sat alone on the deck, contemplating the still waters of the lake. His secure phone, maintained for Foundation business, chimed with a message from the warden of the women's prison where Audrey was serving her sentence. Per protocol, informing you of prisoner Montgomery's request for a meeting with her son. Requires your approval as legal guardian. Russell deleted the message without responding. Like every previous request, this one would be denied. Leo had been clear from the beginning. He wanted nothing to do with the mother who had tried to kill him. Dad, Leo's voice came from behind him. Can't sleep. Russell turned, opening his arms as his son came to sit beside him. Bad dream. Leo shrugged. Just thinking too much. Uncle Diego mentioned Mom's appeal today when he thought I couldn't hear. Russell sighed. I'm sorry, buddy. We shouldn't have discussed that around you. It's okay, Leo replied. I'm glad she's staying in prison. Russell studied his son's face in the moonlight. How do you feel about all of it now? It's been a while since we really talked about it. Leo considered the question with a maturity that sometimes startled Russell. I used to wonder if I should try to forgive her someday, he admitted. Ms. Patterson at school says forgiveness helps the person doing the forgiving. Russell nodded, but remained silent, letting Leo work through his thoughts. But I don't think I will, Leo continued. She didn't just try to hurt us. She laughed about it. That's not something you forgive. Unable to argue with his son's assessment, Russell simply put his arm around Leo's shoulders. It's okay either way, buddy. Some things go beyond forgiveness, and that's a personal choice only you can make. Leo leaned against his father. I'm glad we're like you, Dad. Like me. Yeah. Strong enough not to forgive people who don't deserve it. Strong enough to start over. Russell felt a complex mix of emotions at his son's words. Pride at Leo's resilience. Sadness that he had been forced to develop such wisdom so young. And certainty that they had made the right choice in leaving their old lives behind. Want to know a secret? Russell asked quietly. Leo nodded. I'm stronger because of you. Not the other way around, Russell admitted. Surviving that day, rebuilding our lives, I did it for you. Leo smiled. We did it together. The Montgomery boys. The Miller boys now, Russell corrected gently. New names, new start. Leo yawned. Same team, though. Always, Russell promised. Now back to bed. You've got that field trip tomorrow. After tucking Leo in again, Russell returned to the deck, his thoughts turning to the future rather than the past. Next week, he would finalize the purchase of a small cybersecurity firm developing technology to protect children online, another extension of the Foundation's mission. His phone buzzed with a text from Vince, reporter from Seattle Times, asking questions about the Montgomery case again. Third anniversary of the resurrection coming up. Wanting to handle it. Russell typed a simple reply, standard response. No comments, no interviews. The public's fascination with their story had never fully waned. Books had been written, a documentary produced, and occasional news retrospectives appeared on major anniversaries. Russell ignored them all, focusing instead on building something meaningful from the wreckage of betrayal. As he prepared for bed, Russell glanced at a framed photograph on his nightstand. Leo and Phoenix at the lake last summer, both looking joyful and carefree. Not the perfect family portrait from his previous life, but something real and honest. The betrayal had taken much from them, but it had also revealed truths that might otherwise have remained hidden. About Audrey and her parents. About the facade of their marriage. About human capacity for both cruelty and loyalty. Most importantly, it had taught Russell